Hello everyone, Omni-sensei here with What If I Were Reborn as a Vampire in the DC-verse? Part 2. If you enjoy this content, smash the like button. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description.
Vampire rule number 14. If you're tempted to sparkle, stake your own heart. Seriously, you're better than that. The basement of the old community center was barely lit, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead providing a low, constant buzz. It was a relic from another era, a place that had once been a beacon of hope, but now bore the weight of neglect. The result of years spent cutting costs, trying and failing to stay afloat. The walls, yellowed with age, held memories of a time when the center had been alive with activity, back when Thomas and Martha Wayne had funded it as part of their vision for a better Gotham. That was decades ago, though, and without stable donors or anyone to champion its cause, the building had fallen into disrepair. A darn shame, the vampire thought, looking at an old bronze plate hanged in their honor. John stepped inside, his shoes echoing faintly on the cracked linoleum floor. He took a moment to survey the room. There were the usual faces, people who had become fixtures at these meetings, each of them carrying a different burden, yet all bound by the same desperate need for escape. He saw the folks he lured in, counted them, and gave them a nod acknowledging their presence and promising to fulfill his part of their little arrangement. Some kindness and lots of presents could do a whole lot of good. Though John had a nagging feeling that the powers that be wouldn't appreciate his ways, either because they desired it or found it immoral. It did, however, work much better than anything they came up with to fight this war on drugs. He moved toward the circle of folding chairs, nodding in greeting to the few who noticed him. Carl was already there, his gaunt frame slumped in a chair near the back, hands trembling slightly as he fiddled with a crumpled pack of gum. Next to him was Deb, a middle-aged woman who had once been vibrant and full of life, but now seemed like a shadow of her former self. Her hair, once fiery red, was now streaked with gray, a testament to the years she'd lost to her addiction. It was crazy how the needle would age people, a few years of injections, and they would all look 20 years older than they really were. "Evening, folks," John said, settling into a chair with an easy smile. His voice was smooth, disarming, the kind that made people want to trust him. It was a skill he had honed over the years, and it served him well. Few muttered responses greeted him. Most of these people were too deep in their own thoughts to offer more than a nod or a grunt, but that was okay. John wasn't here to draw attention to himself. Not too much, anyway. He was here to listen, to offer support, and to slowly, subtly position himself as someone they could rely on. They knew him as the guy who brought in Bubbles and got him to leave the streets for a bed in a rehab center, then just continued showing up with food and clothes to be donated. A bit of presence here and there taught them how to appreciate his diligence instead of questioning it. "Good to see you again, Johnny," Carl said quietly, offering a shaky smile. The man was a wreck, his life having spiraled out of control years ago after a back injury introduced him to painkillers. Now, he was just another casualty of the opioid crisis, hanging on by a thread. The man was once an ace in construction and home renovation, able to turn some concrete and bricks into a dream house, or so he said after a few drinks. Then he got hurt and went to see a doctor who smiled and gave him the prescription that ended it all. John returned the smile, giving Carl a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Good to see you too, Carl. How are you holding up? Some days are better than others, you know? I'm trying, but it's hard." Carl shrugged, the motion almost imperceptible. "I know it is," John replied, his tone sympathetic. "But you're here, and that counts for a lot." The room slowly filled with more people, each one carrying their own story of pain, of battles fought and lost. Mike, the ex-Marine, entered with his usual heavy steps, taking a seat on the edge of the circle. The man was a hulking figure, his face hard and lined with the memories of a past he rarely spoke about. John had heard snippets, though whispers of things Mike had done during his tours in Latin America, things that haunted him even now. John caught Mike's eye and offered a nod. Mike returned it, his expression grim. The group leader, an older woman named Helen, cleared her throat, signaling the start of the meeting. She wasn't much for speeches, preferring to keep things informal. There were no grand introductions, no prayers or rituals, just people talking, sharing their struggles in the hope that someone else might understand and maybe, just maybe help them get better. "So, who wants to start?" Helen asked, her voice raspy from years of smoking. Deb was the first to speak up, her voice wavering as she recounted the past week. "I've been clean for 3 weeks now," she said, her eyes flicking nervously around the room. "But it's been hell. Every day it's like this weight pressing down on me. I miss my kids so much, and I know it's my fault they're gone. Sometimes, I just want to give up. Oh, cry me a river. I once had to dig up a bullet out of my own cheeks with a butter knife," was what John wanted to say, and he could continue trauma dumping for a good while about the costs of moving up in the worlds in this case. But he didn't. This was work after all. John leaned forward, his gaze steady on her. 3 weeks is no small feat, Deb. You're doing something a lot of people couldn't. But you can't beat yourself up for what's happened. You've got to keep looking forward. Keep pushing through. Your kids need you to be strong. I know. It's just hard. Deb nodded, though her eyes were still wet with unshed tears. It always is, John agreed, his voice low and comforting. But you're not alone. You've got all of us here, and we're going to help you through it. There were murmurs of agreement around the circle, quiet solidarity forming among them. John noticed the way people looked at him, the trust they were beginning to place in him. It was exactly what he wanted, taking over Brideshead, one junkie's heart at a time. He turned his attention to Mike next, sensing the tension radiating off the man. "How about you, Mike? How've you been?" Mike shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Been better," he muttered. "Been worse, too. Sometimes I think about the things I did, and I wonder if I'm ever going to be free of it." John didn't offer platitudes or patriotic nonsense. He wasn't interested in pretending that Mike's service had been some noble endeavor. He knew better than that. Lots of folks were still riding the juice from the Cold War, and that meant telling a man that butchering civilians in the name of relative democracy and free markets was rather common, even when they were propping up dictators. The meeting continued with more stories, more confessions. There was Lydia, a young woman who had lost her scholarship and dropped out of college after her cocaine habit took over her life. The poor girl had just stopped tricking to get her vials and was now worried about catching the bug. There was Greg, an aging musician who'd seen his bandmates die, one by one from overdoses, and now struggled to stay clean long enough to finish a song. John listened to each of them, offering words of encouragement, never pushing too hard. He knew how to walk the line, how to make people feel like he was on their side without giving too much of himself away. When the meeting finally wrapped up, people lingered, talking in small groups or offering each other quiet support. John stayed behind, moving from person to person, making sure they knew he was there for them. "I should really hire someone to do this for me," he thought while patting Mike on the back. Brand marketing wasn't really that fun. Oh well, the woes of a small business owner. He approached Helen as she gathered the coffee cups, her hands shaking slightly from arthritis. "You're doing good work here," he said, his voice warm, "but I can see the place could use some help." Helen sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Yeah, it's been tough. We used to get some funding, but that dried up years ago. Now we're just scraping by. I've come into some money recently. Maybe I could help out, make a donation to keep things going." John nodded thoughtfully. Helen looked up at him, surprise and gratitude in her eyes. "You'd do that? That would mean the world to us, Johnny." He smiled, the gesture sincere. He just remembered the video of a man trying to shower on the beach while some sneaky prankster kept putting more and more shampoo over his head. "Of course. I'll talk to some people, see what I can do. This place is important. People need it," he said. Helen patted his arm, her eyes misting over. "Thank you. Really, thank you." John just nodded, watching as she walked away. He knew what he was doing. By positioning himself as a benefactor, he was solidifying his influence here, making sure these people saw him as their lifeline. It was all part of the plan, but he couldn't deny that it felt a tiny little bit good to be helping, even if his reasons weren't entirely pure. Someone somewhere was likely cursing him for disliking drugs and doing something about it. Even if it was good for him, the benefits it brought to the greater world around him might be too great for some people's tastes. He should only maim, kill, steal, and otherwise slaughter everyone and everything with no regard for his own quality of life, personal tastes, and opinions. People would then flock around him and serve him based on his good looks, winning smile, and je ne sais quoi of lustful stupidity that drives most people with a system. Unfortunately, neither life nor unlife worked like this. As he left the center, John couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. He was playing a long game, one that required patience and careful maneuvering. But he was getting what he wanted, a foothold in Brideshead and the loyalty of people who one day would do anything for him. And if, along the way, he made their lives a little better, well, that was just the icing on the cake. The meeting might have ended, but the night was still young and he was still very busy. People were more likely to follow someone who offered them something tangible, even if it came with a hidden price tag. His plan to clean up the streets was twofold: eliminate the troublesome fellows and bring the addicts under his control. It was a delicate balance between appearing as a savior and remaining the secretive force that lurked in the shadows, reappearing to break the bones of dealers who got a bit too brave. It's been some time since his biggest stick-up, but he was satisfied with the progress. He started with something simple but powerful, a small daily bribe for those who showed a desire to get clean, or at least the appearance of it. Every addict who came to him for clean needles and went to the local Narcotics Anonymous meetings would get $10, no strings attached. It wasn't much, but in a place like Brideshead, the price of a vial was the price of loyalty. John walked through the alleyways, his dark coat flaring slightly with each step. His presence was commanding, even without the supernatural influence he could wield. He preferred to save that for special occasions, letting his natural charisma do the work. As he approached a small gathering of addicts huddled near a burned-out building, he could hear the soft murmurs of desperation and hope, a toxic mix that he knew how to exploit. "Hey, Johnny!" A lanky man with sunken eyes and a twitch in his neck called out. His voice was shaky, but there was a glimmer of something akin to respect in his eyes, or he was high, maybe both. "You got any more of those clean needles?" John nodded, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a small bag filled with fresh syringes. He handed them over to the man, who took them with trembling hands. "Thanks, man. You don't know how much this helps," the addict said, his voice almost reverent. The bug was everywhere these days, and needles were becoming a rare commodity, forcing the lowliest of fiends to share their stuff with people they'd rather not. "I know exactly how much it helps," John replied with a small, almost predatory smile. "And you know what to do to keep it coming, right?" It was a comical sight. He stood there all threatening while trying to help the man turn his life around. The man nodded eagerly. Yeah, I'll be at the meeting tonight. Promise." "Good," John said, handing him a $10 bill. "Remember, I'm not doing this for free. You keep going to those meetings, and I'll keep helping you out." As the addict shuffled off, John turned his attention to a small group of women nearby. They were younger, with the same desperate look in their eyes but still clinging to some semblance of dignity. He approached them, his voice softening as he spoke. "Evening, ladies," he greeted them with a nod. "How are you holding up?" One of them, a woman in her mid-20s with frayed hair and a weary expression, looked up at him. "We're getting by," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "But it ain't easy." John reached into his pocket again, pulling out another bag of clean needles and some more cash. "Here, this might help. And if you need more, you know where to find me." The women took the supplies gratefully, exchanging quick glances with each other before one of them spoke up. "Why are you doing this? What's in it for you?" John chuckled, the sound low and almost comforting. Let's just say I like seeing people turn their lives around. Besides, it's good to have friends in low places. He could see the skepticism in their eyes, but they didn't push further. Instead, they accepted the help, tucking the money into their pockets and murmuring their thanks. As they walked away, John watched them with a calculating gaze. Every person he helped was another thread in the web he was weaving. A web that would eventually ensnare them all, for the greater good, his greater good to be precise. As John continued his rounds, he noticed a car pull up to one of the still active drug corners. The car was a bit too nice for this part of town, standing out like a sore thumb. He paused, observing with mild curiosity as a young woman stepped out, her friends lingering in the vehicle. She had a sharp look about her, smart but desperate. He recognized the signs all too well. The corner dealer, a wiry man with greasy hair, sauntered over to her, a sly grin on his face. John could hear their conversation from where he stood, his enhanced senses picking up every word. "You're looking for something special tonight?" the dealer asked, his tone oozing with false charm. The woman handed him a wad of cash, her expression cold and focused. "Just the usual. No extras." The dealer chuckled, leaning in a little too close. "Come on, sweetheart. How about a little something for me, and I'll throw in a bonus?" She recoiled slightly, her eyes narrowing. "I said no extras. Just give me the stuff." The dealer's grin faltered, but he handed over the small baggie, muttering under his breath. The woman took it and quickly turned on her heel, heading back to the car without another word. As she drove away, John couldn't help but smirk. She had fire, but he knew it wouldn't last. In a few weeks, maybe less, she'd be back, and her resolve would have crumbled. That was a shame. She would have been a mighty fine meal if she hadn't been so intent on wasting her life, money, and blood lusting after that blast. Still, the corner boy had been a bit too pushy for his tastes. "Got a tough one there," John remarked as he approached the dealer, who flinched at the unexpected presence. "Johnny," the dealer greeted nervously, his earlier bravado gone. "Didn't see you there. Just, taking care of business, you know?" When someone went around helping out the fiends, he was bound to piss off a couple hoppers. What followed was a right beating that taught people that sweet Johnny Blue Eyes wasn't all that sweet after all. John nodded, his expression unreadable. "I see that. Be careful with that one. She might not break as easily as the others." The dealer swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. John clapped him on the shoulder, the gesture both reassuring and ominous. "Just a friendly warning. You don't want to push too hard, too fast." Yeah, I get it," the dealer stammered. "I'll be careful." John gave him a final nod before turning away, continuing his rounds with a satisfied air. He had no real concern for the woman or the dealer, but it amused him to see the dynamics at play. The delicate dance of power, desperation, and control was something he excelled at, and he enjoyed watching it unfold. As the night wore on, John found himself reflecting on the strange satisfaction he felt from helping these people. It was a twisted kind of pleasure, knowing that he was doing good deeds for all the wrong reasons. But he didn't let himself dwell on it for too long. He had a plan to execute, and sentimentality had no place in it. Each addict he helped, each connection he made, brought him closer to his goal. And that's all that matters when all is said and gone. He was just playing damage control, trying to remove the demand for drugs instead of just beating up the offer. Still, helping people instead of just eating them did feel pretty good. And if a certain dealer got beaten to an inch of his life and then lightened from the burden of his ill-gotten money, no one would complain. Vampire rule number 15. If you're technically perpetually underage due to an untimely demise, just remember, age is nothing but a number. Unfortunately, so is a prison sentence. Oh. John Harker leaned back in the creaky wooden chair of his crack house domicile, the faint sound of dripping water and distant sirens filtering through the boarded-up windows, just to remind him that he was in Gotham and that it sucked heavily. No matter how many times he tried to clean it, The place still stank of mold, stale cigarettes, and the lingering despair of the previous inhabitants. A perfume everyone in Brideshead learned to ignore but was becoming increasingly inconvenient. He was growing tired of the cracked floor, the peeling wallpaper, and, more importantly, the inability to bring his snacks home. There was something darkly amusing about the fact that, in the eyes of the law, his meals were pedophiles. The irony wasn't lost on him, and he often chuckled at the thought, but he knew he needed to get out of this place. Sooner rather than later. The problem was his age. Or at least what his ID said about it. Being technically underage meant he couldn't just walk into a rental office and sign a lease on a nice apartment in a better part of Gotham. No, he'd have to do things the hard way, the legal way. Get emancipated, make himself a legal adult, and then find a place that wasn't crawling with junkies. That's how John found himself in the dingy office of Vinny DeLuca, a sleazy lawyer recommended by one of the guys from the Narcotics Anonymous meetings he'd been frequenting. Vinny was the kind of guy who wore cheap suits that were always a size too small, with hair slicked back so far it looked like an oil spill. He had a reputation for getting things done, no questions asked, as long as the price was right. He also had a reputation for being a loyal customer in the local burlesque bars. But that was neither here nor there. "All right, kid, here's the deal," Vinny said, sliding a stack of papers across his cluttered desk. "You sign here, here, and we'll get you emancipated. You'll be your own man, free to do whatever the hell you want." John picked up the pen, giving it a casual twirl between his fingers before scrawling his name across the dotted lines. "That's it? I thought there'd be more to it." Vinny smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Well, we do need your parents' signatures too. You know, just a formality." John raised an eyebrow. "Parents, huh? That might be tricky, seeing as how they're unavailable." "Well, his mother is unavailable. His father is too busy not knowing he exists to help sign him off." No problem. You just sign their names too. No one's gonna check. Besides, you've got that honest face. Who's gonna doubt you?" Vinny said, waving a hand dismissively. "Honest face?" John repeated with a smirk. "Yeah, sure. Hand it over." He quickly forged the signatures, which was probably a crime now that he thought about it. Fortunately, Batman didn't burst from the window to break his neck in the name of justice. However, it was almost too easy. Vinny, clearly pleased with the incoming paycheck, grinned as he took the papers back. "Great. My brother's a notary. He'll stamp these and get everything squared away." "Expedited, of course, for a little extra," the man said with a wink, and that, ladies and gentlemen, was why Gotham's bureaucracy was an utter mess. Partly, at least. "Of course," John said, already planning his next move. Within a few days, John had the emancipation papers in hand, officially recognized as an adult by the state of New Jersey. It was almost laughable how simple it had been. Just a few strokes of a pen and a greasy handshake, and he was free to make bigger moves. The next step was finding a new place to live. He wasn't going to settle for anything less than perfect, so he set up an appointment with a local realtor. The woman, in her early 30s, with a blonde bob and an overenthusiastic smile, met him outside a swanky apartment building in the better part of town. Yes, swanky is a real word. "Mr. Harker, I'm Susan Monroe, but just call me Susan. It's such a pleasure to meet you. I've got a few properties lined up that I think you're going to love," she chirped, her heels clicking on the pavement as they approached the entrance. "I'm sure you've picked out the best for me, Susan. Lead the way." John flashed her a charming smile, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of prying eyes. "I'm feeling a bit peckish," he thought, and the vampire system agreed with him. "Blood points, 680/800. As they toured the apartments, John was careful to choose his words, asking about things like natural light and room sizes, but what he was really interested in was the isolation of the master bedrooms. He needed a place where he could sleep during the day without worrying about a stray beam sneaking in through a poorly positioned window. "Sunlight is the enemy. This one's a real gem," Susan said as they entered the final apartment. "Top floor, no neighbors on either side. and the master bedroom is tucked away in the back. Nice and private. Private, huh? John mused, stepping into the master bedroom. It was perfect. No windows facing the east, thick curtains already installed, and plenty of space. I think this might be the one. Susan smiled, clearly pleased with herself. I knew you'd like it. Shall we head back to the office to go over the paperwork? John turned to face her, his smile widening as he let a bit of his natural charm, enhanced by his vampiric presence, seep into his voice. Actually, Susan, I was thinking we could take a moment right here to celebrate finding the perfect place. You've been such a big help, he said, looking forward to the next part. Well, I suppose we could. I mean, it's been a long day, and we could use a break. Susan hesitated for just a second, her professional demeanor wavering under the intensity of his gaze. Exactly, John said smoothly, stepping closer. Why don't we take a seat? You've worked hard for this commission, and you deserve a little reward. She blushed slightly, flattered by his attention and unable to resist the pull of his presence. They sat down on the bed, the atmosphere shifting from businesslike to something more intimate. John kept the conversation light, charming her with his wit and only using his power to go the extra mile. Mind control just for a pleasant snack wasn't a good look after all. Susan found herself laughing more than she expected, her usual caution slipping away. It wasn't long before she was leaning closer to him, her hand brushing against his. John took that as his cue, gently tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. You've really outdone yourself, Susan. I can't thank you enough for finding this place. The words were soft, but the meaning behind them was clear. Susan felt her heart race as she looked into his eyes, feeling a connection that she couldn't quite explain. In other words, she was overcome by the horny, and needed an urgent boink lest she do something foolish. You're welcome, John, she whispered, barely aware of her own voice. He leaned in, pressing a tender kiss to her lips, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't. She leaned into the kiss, her fingers curling into his shirt as she let herself get lost in the moment. Yes, something foolish indeed. As the kiss deepened, John's fangs gently grazed her lip, just enough to draw a tiny drop of blood. She gasped, but he soothed her with a soft murmur, his voice like velvet. Just relax, Susan. I'll take care of you. Even this much was enough to bring great pleasure to the one bitten, perhaps greater than a vampire's own satisfaction. Yet another reason not to bite a man unless he could find a new way to absorb their blood. Some kind of blood manipulation. Susan nodded, completely under his spell as he moved to her neck, kissing her skin before sinking his fangs in, carefully and gently. The bite was painless, almost euphoric, and Susan melted into his embrace as he fed, taking only what he needed. When he pulled back, Susan was left dazed but blissful, the bite already healing. John smiled at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You've been amazing, Susan. Thank you, he said sincerely. Anything for you, John. I'm glad you're happy. She blinked up at him, her mind foggy but content. I am, he assured her, helping her to her feet. Now, let's get that paperwork sorted. Susan, still in a bit of a daze but feeling incredibly pleased with herself, led him back to the office where they finalized the deal. John made sure everything was in order, and by the end of the day, he had the keys to his new apartment, an isolated, sun-proof haven where he could finally rest easy. Title lost. Crack house resident. New title gained. Started from the bottom. At last, John did indeed turn from a level 1 crack house resident to a level 5 crook. Vampire rule number 17. Money may not buy happiness, but it does buy silence, secrecy, and a nice coffin. Oh. John Harker leaned back in the plush leather seats of the newly acquired black Lincoln Town car, the engine purring softly as he took in the sights of the city. It was a far cry from the crack house he used to call home, a place that had been as much a reminder of his precarious situation as it was a shelter. Well, shelter might be a big word for that place. For walls and tons of problems is more fitting. But that was all in the past. I gotta think about the future, John thought. Now, with $500,000 of dirty money tucked away, the fledgling vampire was ready to take the next step in his journey. The world didn't stop turning just because he'd clawed his way out of the gutter, and there were still plenty of challenges on the horizon. He'd been making moves, slowly but surely turning his ill-gotten gains into legitimate enterprises. The metal waste collection and repurposing gig with Bubbles had been his first foray into the world of above-board business. It had started small, just a couple of trucks, some reliable drivers, and a knack for finding value in the city's discarded scraps. Old car parts, rusted metal, and abandoned vehicles all found their way into John's growing empire of junk. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and more importantly, it was legal. In a city like Gotham, where cars are stolen, crashed, burned, and then abandoned every single day, this field is pretty lucrative for people with the means and manpower. Bubbles, his only real employee, had been a complete mess when John found him, just another junkie with a knack for scrounging when he wasn't playing games on the few people naive enough to trust a junkie. In Gotham, that was a very small part of the population. But now, after rehab and some serious training, he was shaping up to be a solid lieutenant. John had plans for him, big plans. The Lincoln was part of that, a gift to mark Bubbles' transition from street rat to ghoul, and soon, he'd be managing the operations that John couldn't oversee himself. But John's ambitions didn't stop at scrap collection. He'd been holding meetings with people who had potential, folks who owed him, and who could use a financial backer to get their own businesses off the ground. Carl, for example, had a knack for construction and an eye for detail. A home development company with him at the helm could be a goldmine, especially in a city as volatile as Gotham, where the demand for housing was always high and someone was always willing to pay for discretion. Then there was Don, a guy with a gift for flipping cars. He could take a wreck and turn it into a ride worth tens of thousands. The car flipping business would be a lucrative venture, and with John's backing, they could expand their operations far beyond the local chop shops. Max Black, John's first blood doll, was also part of the plan. She'd always had a dream of running her own cafe or bakery. It wasn't just about the money for her. It was about making something of herself, and John was more than willing to help her do that. A cafe with her at the helm would be a perfect way to further launder some extra cash. And with how profitable and entertaining his nightly bouts of vigilantism were getting, John was pretty sure he'd need all the laundering he could get. Now that I think about it, a laundromat is a pretty good front, he thought and added to the list. Finally, there was the hostel. It was something John had been thinking about for a while now, a place for the homeless, the down and out, the ones who'd been kicked to the curb by society. But it wouldn't just be a charity case. Those who stayed would work, contributing to the upkeep of the place and, in turn, gaining some semblance of dignity. And in return, John would gain their loyalty, their trust, and, in some cases, their blood put in nice, compact bags if they were clean and healthy enough. It was a long-term investment, one that could pay off in ways most people wouldn't even think of. As the Lincoln rolled through the streets of Gotham, John couldn't help but feel a certain satisfaction. He was making progress, turning the chaos of his life into something that resembled order. He might have been a monster in the eyes of many, including himself, but he was a monster with a plan, and that counted for something. The car came to a stop outside a nondescript building in Brideshead, one of the many places he now had business in. The city didn't know it yet, but John Harker was here to stay. The old power structures in Gotham had no idea what was coming. Some must have heard of the monster of Brideshead, the one who'd driven the biggest drug dealers into hiding, right there in the dope capital of Gotham City, but they didn't know who or what he was, and that was just how John liked it. He stepped out of the car, straightening his jacket as he surveyed the building. It was time to see what the next step would be, to figure out how to grow his influence even further. The night was young, and there was plenty of work to be done. They were finished. That was the general sentiment amongst those who made their fortune off the insanely profitable drug trade in Brideshead. Everything was going so smoothly The Bat had been busy dealing with problems bigger than folks getting high and other folks gladly helping. They were rolling in dough, making so much money even the usual stick-ups and bribes barely put a dent in their inflated profit margins. Then everything came crashing down. That monster woke up and decided to ruin everything for shit and giggles, taking their money and their dope, then burning the whole thing. For all they knew, the street loved speaking, and nobody said a word about someone selling drugs or showing off his gold. It made no sense. That's why they all came here, to make sense of it all and try not to get devoured by the vultures playing the same game they did, the bastards taking their market shares, selling to their fiends, and even nibbling small parts of their territory. They didn't know what kind of beast waited for them. The back room of the rundown warehouse in Park Row might look rough on the outside, but the inside was as well furnished as it could be. All it needed was a couple scantily clad ladies, and it would have everything a gangster loved. Booze, food, and the smell of money were everywhere. Alas, the people inside couldn't possibly enjoy it. The thick stench of cigarettes and stale sweat hung thick in the air, mingling with the tension that crackled between the men seated around the battered wooden table. This was a gathering of Gotham's most ruthless retail drug dealers. Men who were used to being in control, barely forced into cooperation by their shared fear of losing money. At the head of the table, or rather, where the head of the table should have been, there was an empty chair. No one dared sit there, not after what had happened to the last man who tried to assert himself as the leader of this troubled alliance. Instead, the seat of relative power had shifted slightly to the right, where Hungry sat, or rather, slumped. The man who had once been a force of nature in Brideshead, feared and respected, was now a shadow of his former self. Bruises still marked his face, remnants of the brutal beating he'd received from the monster during the raids that had shaken their small, violent world. His defeat had cost him not just his reputation, but also a small fortune in bribes and legal fees to keep himself and his men out of jail. Across from him was Blue, a wiry, sharp-eyed man who had taken advantage of Hungry's fall from grace to expand his own operations. His icy blue eyes scanned the room, assessing, calculating. He was a man who thrived in the shadows, known for his ability to vanish and reappear when least expected. Tonight, he was particularly watchful, aware that Hungry's recent humiliation made him unpredictable. The other men around the table were a mix of old heads and ambitious up-and-comers. Among them was Slim Tony, flashy in his tailored suit, a symbol of his connections to the East Coast Mafia. He leaned forward, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. "We're all getting squeezed here," he said, breaking the uneasy silence. "That monster's making it impossible to move product in Brideshead. We can't keep this up. We need to take him out before he does more damage." Hungry grunted, wincing slightly as he shifted in his chair. "Easier said than done," he muttered, his voice hoarse from a combination of exhaustion and the residual pain from his beating. "I've faced tough bastards before, but this one, he's something else. Hit us where it hurt, leaving us scrambling. My men, we barely got out, and it cost me more than any of you will ever know. Looks like you lost more than just your pride, Hungry, but you're right. Rushing in won't solve anything. We need to be smart about this, strategic." Blue's lip curled into a slight smirk. Blue went to community college, so he was practically a scholar within these walls, with the appropriate stick shoved up his arse and a dictionary down his mouth. One of the older dealers, Old Man Dario, his face lined with years of experience and bad choices, nodded in agreement. "We need someone who can deal with this without drawing too much heat. We bring in a big name and we risk more than just our business. The Bat could get involved. None of us want that. What about Deadshot or Deathstroke? I know people who could get them on the line. They don't come cheap, but they get results." Slim Tony leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. The suggestion was met with a murmur of approval, but Hungry scoffed, shaking his head. "Deadshot's gonna bleed us dry just for showing up. And Deathstroke? That man's got an ego bigger than this city. We can't afford either of them." Not after what we've already lost. He said with derision, "This is a kid's talk." Lucky Lou, a middle-aged dealer known for his sharp suits and sharper tongue, chimed in. "How about setting a trap? Make it look like a juicy target, then ambush him. We've got the numbers. We know the streets better than anyone. He's just one guy." Blue exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "You think he'll fall for that? The monster's no fool. But it could work if we play it right. We just need to make sure the bait is irresistible," he said, shaking his head. "We could always pay off some cops. Let them do the dirty work for us. We keep our hands clean, and if something goes south, it's on them, not us." Greasy Pete, a portly man whose sweat-soaked shirt clung to his rotund frame, leaned forward, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Nah, kid, bad idea." Old man Dario shook his head slowly. "Cops are a gamble. They take our money, sure, but there's no guarantee they won't double-cross us. And if the bat gets wind of it, we're all finished. No, this has to be handled in-house." Slim Tony shifted in his seat, leaning closer to the table. "What about calling in a favor from the cartels? They've got the muscle, the firepower. We could make a deal, let them move some product through Brideshead in exchange for taking care of our monster problem. It's not ideal, but desperate times, right?" Blue frowned, clearly not thrilled with the idea. Bringing in the cartels? That's a whole new level of risk. Once they get a foothold in our territory, good luck getting them out. They'll bleed us dry and leave us fighting over scraps. And you really think they'll send their best to deal with some local problem in Gotham? They've got bigger fish to fry, he argued. Hungry, despite his weakened state, straightened up slightly, his eyes narrowing as he considered the suggestion. "The cartels could be useful, but only if we play it right. We can't afford an all-out war, not in Gotham. But if we push them into a corner and make it seem like we've got no other choice, they might be willing to take the risk. Or at least send someone who knows how to deal with problems like this." Old man Dario, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. "A war is the last thing we need, but we don't have to fight this monster ourselves. There's someone out there who's fallen on hard times, someone who's still got the skills but is desperate enough to take a risky job for cheap. No need for the cartels, no need for an all-out war. Just a simple transaction, no questions asked." The room fell silent, the dealers exchanging glances as they tried to figure out who Dario was talking about. But he offered no more details, just a sly smile that hinted at a plan already in motion. Blue tilted his head, curious. "Who do you have in mind, old man?" Dario's lips curled into a sly smile, his eyes glinting with the light of dangerous secrets. "Someone who knows this city well. Someone who's been off the grid for a while but hasn't forgotten how to handle a job like this. Let's just say, she's got a venomous touch." The others around the table tensed, realizing Dario was talking about someone serious, the kind who could be both a solution and a problem. "We do this, we do it right. No mistakes, no loose ends. The monster's going down, and anyone who gets in our way." Hungry spoke up, trying and failing to keep his bruised ego from showing. He didn't need to finish the sentence, though. The room knew what was at stake. Old man Dario nodded, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous resolve. "Then it's settled. We'll make the arrangements. And if all goes well, we'll be rid of this monster for good, and we might not even need to pay all that much." The dealers exchanged wary glances, knowing they were treading dangerous waters. But with their backs against the wall, they were ready to take the risk. The monster of Brideshead was about to face his deadliest challenge yet, one that would either end his reign of terror or plunge the city into even deeper chaos. Or so they thought. Vampire rule number 17. When flirting with mortals, remember, a little charm goes a long way, but never, ever reveal your fangs unless you're ready for some seriously awkward small talk about dental work. Nothing says unintentional comedy like a bloodsucker caught in a conversation about braces. Vicky Vale sat in the editor's office, her frustration barely contained as she watched the scene unfold. Across from her, Gus, the old, weathered editor who'd seen more of Gotham's dirt than most people knew existed, was in the middle of a heated discussion with another staff member. Vicky might be the subject of the conversation, but she might as well have been invisible. "Look, Gus, I know you think she's got potential," said Frank, a greasy, self-satisfied man who'd wormed his way up the ranks by playing all the right cards with all the wrong people. "But we need someone who can bring in the big stories, the ones that make headlines and get clicks. Not chick-chasing after phantom vigilantes or pissing off our generous friends out there. Vicky's got more integrity in her little finger than half the reporters in this building, Frank. Just because she doesn't make them blue bloods happy doesn't mean she can't do the job." Gus grunted, his patience clearly running thin. Making the blue bloods happy. That was just a nice way of saying she didn't want to spread her legs for rich old coots or STD-ridden trust fund kids. Maybe so, but integrity doesn't pay the bills. We need stories that sell, Gus. Stories that get people talking, and Vicky, no offense, isn't exactly delivering that. Frank leaned back in his chair, smirking. Vicky's grip tightened on the arms of her chair, her nails digging into the worn leather. She knew this was how it went. The Gazette had once been a beacon of truth in Gotham, a place where real journalism thrived. But times had changed. The city had changed. Now, it was all about sensationalism, and if you weren't willing to sell your soul for a byline, you were left fighting for scraps. Gus sighed, rubbing his temples. He looked at Vicky, his expression softening. "Vicky, you've been doing good work, but we need something big, something that'll shake things up." "I'm trying, Gus," Vicky said, her voice firm. "But every time I pitch a story, it gets sidelined. I'm not asking for special treatment, just a fair shot." "Fair shot? You want a fair shot, Vale? Fine. We've got a project no one else wants to touch. Down in Brideshead." Frank snorted, his belly giggling when he moved. "Brideshead? That's a death sentence." Vicky raised an eyebrow. Frank shrugged, as if the last crew they sent there didn't get mugged, the journalist beaten up by a drug addict, and the cameraman getting stabbed for his trouble. "Maybe, but it's also a chance to prove yourself. Gus here seems to think you can handle it. So how about it? You willing to risk it?" Gus shot Frank a glare before turning back to Vicky. "It's not an easy assignment, Vicky, but I think you can do something with it. Show people what's really going on in Gotham's underbelly," he said, but they both knew he just wanted to get some peace. There was nothing she could do about it, though. Vicky hesitated. Brideshead was infamous, even among Gotham's many dark corners. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear, where the law didn't reach, and where life was as cheap as a $10 vial. But it was also a place where stories were born, where the truth was buried under layers of grime and bad choices. A tragedy at every turn. Vicky never went there. Her parents did well enough that they never had to see the bad side of town. "I'll do it, but I need a decent crew, and I need time to do it right." She nodded slowly. "You can have the crew, but don't expect top of the line. We've got an old truck and some secondhand gear. Take it or leave it." Frank smirked, and she really wished she could just punch him and be done with it. "She'll take it," Gus interjected before Vicky could argue. He gave her a small nod. "You've got this, kid." Vicky left the office with a mix of trepidation and determination. Gus was right. This was her chance to prove herself, and she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. A few days later, Vicky found herself in the back of a beat-up van with her cameraman, Richie, and sound guy, Dave. The equipment rattled as they bumped over the pothole-riddled roads leading into Brideshead. The closer they got, the more run-down the buildings became, the more desolate the streets. It was like stepping into another world, one Gotham's upper crust preferred to forget existed. "Bloody hell," Richie muttered, peering out the window. "Didn't think it could get worse than Park Row." "Welcome to Brideshead," Vicky said dryly. "Home of the forgotten." Dave, a stoic guy who rarely spoke unless absolutely necessary, just grunted in agreement. The van rolled to a stop outside what had once been a storefront. The windows were boarded up, and the sign had long since faded into obscurity. Vicky took a deep breath, checking her notes one last time before stepping out onto the cracked pavement. "All right," she said, turning to Richie and Dave. "Let's try to find some locals willing to talk. We're looking for personal stories. People struggling to survive, how they're coping, and what they need." "Got it," Richie said, slinging the camera over his shoulder. "But don't expect anyone to be too friendly." Vicky nodded, already bracing herself for the cold reception she knew they were likely to get. And in her pocket was some pepper spray her mother had all but demanded she carry when she heard about her daughter going to the East End. She didn't tell them it was Brideshead, or her father would have followed her around carrying a shotgun. Not a great look when you're trying to interview people. The first few attempts were rough. Most people just ignored them, ducking into alleys or slamming doors in their faces. The few who did stop to talk quickly turned hostile when they realized what Vicky and her crew were after. One man even lunged at Richie, shouting obscenities and accusing them of being vultures. It wasn't until they reached a small, makeshift market that things began to shift. Vicky spotted a group of young men loitering near a fruit stand, eyeing the camera crew with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. One of them, a tall guy with a shaved head and tattoos snaking up his neck, made a beeline for them. Something told her he wasn't coming to say hi. "Yo, what's this?" he demanded, his tone aggressive. "Just trying to get some stories. We're not here to cause trouble." Vicky held up her hands in a placating gesture. "Stories? You think anyone here gives a damn about your stories?" The guy scoffed. Richie shifted nervously, but Vicky stood her ground. "I'm trying to show Gotham what life is like down here. People need to see what's really going on," she said, doing her best to sound diplomatic and understanding. "Like they care," the guy sneered, and his friends started making comments trying to provoke the young man. Before things could escalate further, a voice cut through the tension. "Hey, Javi, leave him be." The guy, Javi, turned to see a tall, well-dressed man approaching. He was younger than most of the people milling around, but there was something about him, an air of authority that made Javi step back, grumbling under his breath. "Fine, but don't think this means you're welcome here," Javi spat before slinking off. Vicky turned to the newcomer, her eyes widening slightly as she took in his appearance. He was striking, with piercing blue eyes and an easy confidence that made it clear he wasn't afraid of much. "Hot darn," Richie whistled, quickly correcting himself when Dave gave him a judgmental look. "No homo." "Thanks for that," Vicky said, offering a small smile. "Don't sweat it," the man replied, his voice smooth. "Javi's harmless, just has a bit of a temper." "Seems like everyone around here has a temper," Richie muttered. "Richie," she chided even though she agreed deep down. The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Can't blame them. Life's hard down here. You seem to know your way around." Vicky nodded, studying him more closely. The man shrugged, his expression unreadable. "I get by. Name's John, by the way," he said with an easy smile. Easy, the man, John, she corrected herself, did make it all easy. Easy talking to him. Easy to get comfortable. Easy on the eyes, part of her said. And she quickly killed that troublesome voice that kept looking at his broad shoulders and beautiful blue eyes and those strong long arms and wondering how it would feel being held down by them and, "Miss, you all right?" he asked with his face full of concern, and it took all of her willpower to keep her poker face. Oh, who was she kidding? Her face got as red as it could be. At least he was kind enough to pretend he didn't see it. "Vicky," she replied, trying to regain a sliver of dignity through her professionalism. "We're trying to get some footage for a documentary to show the rest of Gotham what's happening here. Think you could spare a few minutes?" Then her mind returned to the gutter, and she started wondering whether she seemed too desperate to talk to him and only using her work as an excuse. Wait, was she using her work as an excuse? Dang it. Did he notice? Would he like the attention or hate it? Does he think she's a pick-me girl who's scared of dying alone with a bunch of cats? Such were the questions plaguing her overthinking blonde head. John looked at her with an amused smile, and she was pretty sure somebody could cook an omelet on her head right now. Sure, you've got 5 minutes. What do you want to know? He said, almost kindly but not quite. Vicky signaled to Richie and Dave to start recording, took a deep breath, and got back in the zone. We're trying to understand what life is like here, what people are going through. Can you tell us a bit about that? She asked with her game face and game voice on, speaking clearly but not obnoxiously loud. John leaned casually against a nearby fruit stand, picking up an apple and taking a bite. He seemed completely at ease, his demeanor calm and confident. It's on the house, boss, the old man working there said with a smile. Boss? She wanted to ask, but quickly got sucked into Hurricane Harker. Life is tough, John began, his voice steady and deep, easily capturing their attention. People are struggling just to get by. You've got poverty, crime, and a general sense of hopelessness. It's a place where people do what they can to survive, often at the expense of their own well-being. No need to talk about other people's. Empathy is a luxury around these parts. That sounds about right, she thought. This place really was miserable. And you? Vicky asked, her curiosity piqued. How do you fit into all of this? John's expression shifted slightly, hint of something unreadable in his eyes. I try to help where I can. It's not much, but it's something, he said calmly and deliberately. Vicky frowned, sensing there was more to his story. You seem pretty involved. Why? She asked but knew better than to expect a straight answer. Someone's got to do it. This place needs all the help it can get. John took another bite of his apple, chewing thoughtfully. Richie adjusted the camera, capturing the exchange as Vicky continued to probe. Do you think things will ever get better around here? Is there hope for the people living in Brideshead? Hope is a tricky thing. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. But if people stop trying, if they give up, then there's no chance for anything to change. As long as there's someone willing to fight for a better future, there's hope. John's gaze was distant, as if he were looking beyond the grim reality of the streets. The interview went on for a while, with Vicky asking questions and John providing thoughtful, if somewhat guarded, answers. Despite his enigmatic responses, there was a sense of sincerity in his words. He spoke like he knew what life was like on these streets, not some flimsy feel-good priest talk about giving the other cheek and whatnot, but like he really knew and understood it. His presence seemed to command a certain level of respect from the people around him. Vicky studied him, sensing there was more to the story than he was letting on. But before she could press further, a loud crash echoed from across the street, drawing everyone's attention. Javi had returned, clearly spoiling for a fight. He was shoving another man, shouting something unintelligible. John sighed, handing the half-eaten apple back to the vendor before stepping forward. Javi, he called out, his voice firm. What did I tell you? Javi froze, looking sheepish as he realized John was watching. He started it, he muttered, but his aggression had already dissipated. Doesn't matter. Go buy your mom something nice for her birthday instead of wasting time here, John said, pulling out a $20 bill and handing it to Javi. She won't care for it. It's just a waste of money. The kid shook his head, his face stuck in that little grimace of someone who forgot about their own mama's birthday. She carried you for 9 months, John said, looking at him with disapproval. Javi hesitated, glancing at the money before nodding reluctantly. Yeah, all right. As Javi walked away, he turned around to see that the camera had caught everything. It would be very lucky if he were trying to build up his reputation as some do-gooder in these parts, an accident showing his real character. Sorry about that, John said, glancing at his watch. You ran out of time. I've got to go. Thank you, John. Vicky nodded, shaking away a certain feeling she got watching him leave. Just like that, he was gone. At least they got some nice footage. Not enough, sadly, so back to hunting interviews they were. As Vicky and her crew packed up, Richie looked over at her. "So, what do you think? Was that guy for real?" he asked. "I don't know," Vicky said thoughtfully, "but he definitely knows more about this place than most people. We need to dig deeper and hopefully find out what's really going on with him. There's more to his story. I can feel it." Dave, ever the pragmatist, added. With that, they finished their preparations and headed back to the van, ready to sift through the footage and start piecing together their documentary. As they drove away from Brideshead, Vicky couldn't shake the feeling that this assignment was about to lead her into something much bigger than she had anticipated. Vampire rule number 18. A priest is only dangerous if you're an 8-year-old boy. Reginald Cousins, better known as Bubbles on the streets, had been through a lot in his life. He's seen the ups and downs, made all the wrong choices, and lived to regret them. The self-destruction and the struggle to survive had shaped him into the man he was today. But nothing had prepared him for the whirlwind of change that had come his way since he met John Harker. Fresh out of rehab, his mind clear for the first time in years, Bubbles was looking at the small empire John had been quietly building. What had started as a humble scrap metal scavenging gig had grown into a legitimate business, putting bread on the table not just for him but for a growing number of men and women who had been down on their luck. People who just needed a little bit of help, just a bit of breathing room and support to get their lives back. John had given them all a chance. Drivers, mechanics, shopkeepers, people who had been living on the edge just like Bubbles had been. Now they had steady jobs, a purpose, and a sense of belonging that had been missing from their lives for too long. And it was all because of John. Bubbles had heard the whispers, the guys around the garage, the drivers on the scrap collection routes, even the folks setting up the cafe and bakery for that Maxine girl. Everyone spoke about John with a mixture of awe and gratitude. He was young, younger than any of them expected, but there was something about him, something that made you want to follow him, trust him, and, in Bubbles' case, even idolize him. Now, John wanted to meet him in his brand new apartment in Gotham Heights. Now that's something. Gotham Heights was a world apart from Brideshead or even the East End. It was cleaner, quieter, and had a kind of peace that Bubbles had never known. He almost had a heart attack when he passed by a bona fide beat cop walking around the neighborhood and nobody was screaming 5-0 or shop closed and running away. Nah, people just went about their days or nights in this case. Boss should really try to fix his sleep schedule. He thought the man was strong and quick like the best of them, but he was still young and needed proper rest. Reginald made his way through the streets. He couldn't help but wonder if he too would one day leave behind the grime and danger of his old neighborhood. Maybe, if he stuck with John, he could. But parts of him were curious, yearning to know more about the man who had turned his life around. By the time he reached the apartment building, Bubbles felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. He knew John was special, but there was something more, something deeper that he hadn't quite grasped yet. Today, he felt, would change everything. John's apartment was on the top floor, accessible by an elevator that was worlds apart from the creaking, graffiti-covered ones he was used to. When the doors opened, Bubbles stepped into a hallway that was immaculate, with plush carpets and soft lighting that made the place feel warm and inviting. He walked up to the door John had told him about and knocked. "Come in." John's voice called out from inside. Bubbles opened the door and stepped into the apartment. It was classy but had a warmth to it, a far cry from the sterile, lifeless spaces he imagined rich folks lived in. The living room was spacious, with large windows letting in the afternoon light and a comfortable couch facing a low table with a cup of coffee resting on it. Bubbles let out a whistle of admiration and just a bit of envy. His place was a dump in comparison, but he quickly reminded himself that John was the only reason he could afford the place instead of squatting or sleeping in a literal dump. Sleeping with the rats and bugs wasn't a pleasant experience, but it beat getting stabbed, shot, and then molested in Park Row because he couldn't find a shelter. Yes, in that order. Think he's exaggerating? Ask Fatty Boo. He won't answer though, his chubby arse is dead. John was sitting cross-legged on the couch, a small smile on his face as he looked up at Bubbles. He looked relaxed, almost at peace, a stark contrast to the sharp, driven energy he usually exuded when they talked business. "Hey, Bubbles," John said, his voice casual but warm. "Glad you could make it. Have a seat." Bubbles nodded, feeling a little out of his depth but comforted by John's easygoing demeanor. He walked over and sat down on the other end of the couch. "Dag," he cursed, marveling at how utterly soft and comfortable it felt. "A man's behind shouldn't feel that good. That's gay as all hell. Want a cup?" John asked, motioning to the coffee. Sure," Bubbles replied, still a bit hesitant. "Stay calm," John said, his tone gentle but firm. Bubbles was about to ask what he meant when John suddenly disappeared in a blur. One moment he was sitting on the couch, and the next he was across the room, filling a cup with coffee from a pot on the counter. Before Bubbles could fully register what had happened, another blur of motion brought John right back in front of him, handing him the cup. Bubbles stared at John, mouth wide open, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. His heart was pounding in his chest, and his mind raced with questions. But all he could manage was a dumbfounded, "What the heck?" John chuckled, the sound light and almost musical. "Yeah, I get that reaction a lot, but they usually don't last long enough to actually think about it. Drink up. We've got a lot to talk about," he said, his voice full of mirth. Bubbles took the cup with trembling hands, his mind still reeling from the shock. He took a sip, the warmth of the coffee grounding him a little as he tried to find his voice. What was that?" he finally managed to ask. John set his own cup down and leaned back on the couch, his expression serious now. "That, Bubbles, is a little glimpse into what I am. I'm not technically human, at least not in the way you think. I'm something closer to what the superstitious would call a vampire." Bubbles blinked, the words not quite registering at first. "A vampire? You mean like fangs and drinking blood and all that?" he stammered, trying to make sense of all this foolishness he was seeing. "Pretty much," John said, his tone still calm and matter-of-fact. "But it's more complicated than that. I have powers, yes, but I also have responsibilities. Duties to protect this world, to protect mankind from threats that most people don't even know exist, monsters whose strength would put the Superman to shame, empires whose firepower makes hydrogen bombs look like firecrackers, and worse." "Worse?" Bubbles blurted. What in the flying flip could be worse than that? He stared at John, trying to wrap his head around what he was hearing. "And you're telling me this because?" "Because, Bubbles, I've chosen you to be the first of my retainers. My own faithful ghoul. You'll be gifted with enhanced strength, regeneration, and freedom from the chains of time as long as you stay loyal and reaffirm your oaths." John leaned forward, his gaze intense but not unkind. Bubbles' heart skipped a beat. This was insane. But as he looked into John's eyes and saw the sincerity and power there, something in him shifted. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't some kind of elaborate prank. John was serious, dead serious. "What do you mean, a ghoul?" Bubbles asked, his voice a little shaky. "It means you'll be something more than human," John explained. "You'll have a longer life, better health, and strength beyond what you've ever known. But it also means you'll be bound to me. My blood will give you these gifts, but it will also tie you to me. You'll need to renew your oath for 3 nights in a row to become a true ghoul, and after that, maybe once every month or so." Bubbles felt a mix of fear and excitement welling up inside him. This was an opportunity like nothing he'd ever imagined. A chance to become something more, to leave his old life behind for good. But it was also terrifying. The idea of being tied to someone, of having to rely on John's blood to survive. But then again, John had already saved him, had already given him more than he could ever repay. And if John were offering him this, then it would mean he trusted Bubbles and believed in him. John Harker believed in him, I don't know what to say, Bubbles finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Say yes, John replied with a small smile. Say yes and drink from this. John reached into a drawer by the couch and pulled out a small, ornate chalice. He held it up, and Bubbles could see a few drops of dark, rich liquid inside. This is my blood, John said softly. Drink it, and you'll feel the power growing inside you. Your loyalty to me will become stronger, and you'll start to change. It's not an easy road, Bubbles, but it's one I believe you're ready for. Bubbles stared at the chalice, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. He could feel it in his bones. With a deep breath, Bubbles took the chalice from John's hand. His fingers trembled slightly as he raised it to his lips. He hesitated for just a second, then tipped the chalice back and let the liquid slide down his throat. It was like nothing he had ever tasted before, rich, warm, and filled with an almost electric energy. As the blood entered his system, Bubbles felt a surge of power, a warmth that spread through his body, making his muscles tingle and his mind sharpen. He gasped as the sensation grew stronger, overwhelming his senses for a moment before it settled into a steady, powerful pulse. Pains that followed him for years, if not decades, disappeared. The concept he previously couldn't even think about without getting a headache suddenly became clear, basic even. John watched him with an unreadable expression, then smiled as Bubbles lowered the chalice, his eyes wide with awe. How do you feel? John asked, his tone gentle. Bubbles opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come at first. He could feel the change, feel the strength coursing through him, and feel the clarity in his mind. Amazing, Bubbles finally said, his voice filled with wonder. This is incredible. Good, John nodded, pleased. Remember, though, this is just the beginning. You'll need to renew your oath for 3 nights in a row to become a true ghoul. After that, we'll slow it down to once a month or so. But this power, this gift, it's yours now. Use it wisely and stay loyal. Thank you, John. I'll never forget this. I'll never betray you. Bubbles looked at John, a deep sense of gratitude and loyalty welling up inside him. The mere thought sounded sacrilegious, like stabbing your mama or sucking a Johnson. I know you won't, John said with a small smile. You're stronger than you think, Bubbles. And together, we're going to make sure that strength grows. The two sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling between them. Bubbles felt a deep sense of calm, a certainty that he had made the right choice. He didn't fully understand what he was now, but he knew one thing for sure. He was ready to follow John, wherever this new path might lead, even in the depths of hell. As they finished their coffee and the sun began to set outside the apartment, John and Bubbles talked about the future. The plans for the waste management business, the car flipping garage, the grocery store, and the bakery. But now, there was something more, something deeper that tied them together. Bubbles felt it in his bones, in his blood. He was no longer just Reginald Cousins, the man who had clawed his way out of the darkness. He was something more. He was a ghoul, John Harker's first and most loyal retainer, and he would do whatever it took to help his benefactor, to grow alongside him, and to protect the world they were building together, for his master's glory. By the time Bubbles left John's apartment that evening, the moon was high in the sky, casting a pale glow over Gotham Heights. He walked through the quiet streets, his mind buzzing with the possibilities of what lay ahead. There was still so much to learn, so much to understand. But one thing was clear, his life had changed forever. And for the first time in a long time, Bubbles felt like he was finally on the right path. As he made his way back to the East End, back to Brideshead, Bubbles couldn't help but smile. He had a new purpose now, a new life. Reginald made the right choice. With John Harker by his side, there was nothing he couldn't achieve. Vampire Rule number 19. A master is only as good as his servant. Gotham Heights, John Harker's apartment. If someone was to venture within the home of Gotham's most powerful vampire, who also happens to be the only one, and for some unknown reason managed not to get noticed and promptly eliminated by the ever-so-thirsty bloodsucker, they would hear nothing but the sounds of debauchery. Whimpers, giggles, moans, and deep laughs. Sweet nothings and pleas for more pain, more pleasure. Am I a bad person? John thought, not for the first time, while sinking his teeth back onto Cindy's thigh. Or was it Wendy? He couldn't remember. Moan. John. Nor could he name the girl mindlessly moaning beneath him, lost between the fire in her loins and the ecstasy of every kiss he laid upon her neck. Or the blonde woman who had already lost herself, looking so innocent as she slept on the king-sized bed, despite the wild hedonism all around her. And yet he could name their blood types and give an exact description of their diets and workout plans. By now he could even start identifying their ancestry from the taste of their blood. German-Irish. He guessed while she attempted to crush his head with her legs. But he continued to drink until she devolved into a shaking and moaning mess a few seconds away from fainting. It might be exhaustion, it might be pleasure, or it might even be blood loss, but who cares? In a matter of seconds, she was gone and so were the others. All of them resting in his bed after yet another night spent trying and failing to make their respective relationships something deeper and more fulfilling. It was pretty cute. People would probably call him a scumbag. Those same people would also commit greater sins if they only had a fraction of his power. He reached for a blanket and covered their naked bodies, shielding them from the cold while he stepped out of the room and onto his shower. The warm water on his skin was a luxury he had sorely missed during his stay in the crack house, which he kept renting to use it as a hideout in case he ever got stuck in the East End during a sunrise. He washed away the fluids and enjoyed the comfort, trying to ignore that ugly feeling of guilt that showed up every once in a while. Leaving without making them breakfast just didn't sit well with him. That's just rude. Alas, he was really not a morning person these days. Was he a bad person, though? I guess it's a matter of perspective. He concluded, leaving and making himself presentable for another busy night. He closed the door, leaving the girls behind with nothing but some flowers and a note that was as fake as it was romantic. Going down a building that didn't reek of tobacco, liquors, and various bodily fluids. Stairs that weren't littered with rusty needles and broken vials. He opened a door that had yet to be stolen by a dope fiend and came face to face with the one and only Reginald Cousins. Evening, boss man. The dark-skinned man was the first to greet him, opening the door of his black Lincoln. The man loved that car. This gift might have done more to secure his loyalty than the blood bond ever could. Hello, Reginald. He answered, sliding inside the passenger seat. He looked at his first servant's form. It had only been a few days since the blood bond was complete and he officially became his ghoul. But the changes, both physical and mental, were obvious. Gone was the gaunt, fragile, and scarred body of a man who had abused his flesh for decades. Gone were the yellowed, bloodshot eyes looking everywhere and nowhere at the same time, stuck between fear and lust for petty crime, a way to make his $10 and earn his blast at the expense of everyone else. Reginald stood taller, more confident. The power of the blood had roused his appetite and shaped his body into that of a worthy servant with strong muscles and sturdy bones, so that he might do his master's bidding unopposed. His wardrobe had seen some changes, the incendiary kind, and was justly replaced with some new and proper clothes for a proper man. Suits, coats, and some casual clothes that didn't smell worse than Snoop Dogg's pet rat. His wild, poorly maintained afro had been abandoned in favor of a practical and more mature buzz cut. It played a great part in improving his mental state, along with the pride of a man who had achieved freedom from the tyranny of old age through loyalty alone. Where the old him would have scoffed and laughed at anyone who'd ever suggest he did something as inconceivable as going back to school or learning a trade, it was Reginald who decided that he needed more knowledge to serve him properly and managed to get himself a place in community college despite not even finishing high school. It was Reginald who started hounding his lawyer and accountant looking to understand the nightmare of paperwork. It was Reginald who started working out, took self-defense classes, and started getting some practice in the local shooting range. We in America, home of school shootings, so better make the most of it, he had said, earning himself more than a few strange looks from a passing grandma. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that the man Bubbles once was had died so that Reginald Cousins might be born. Renfield to his Dracula. "You're looking good," John said, pleased with the effort the man had put into his appearance. "Thank you, sir," Reginald answered with a reserved smile while turning the key. "But that's some gay shit you just said. Yeah, some things never change. Piss off." John grinned, not bothering to hide his sharp fangs from someone who was already aware of the dark gift. Of course, he didn't tell him everything. That would be foolish. What kind of reckless idiot would inform anyone about things like the priceless immaterial tool that gave them so much power and leverage over everyone else? No, the vampire system is, and will be a secret. The same thing went for his true origins. Telling someone that their world was nothing but entertainment for the masses was a sure way of either making them go insane or thinking that you went insane. In both cases, it was bad for business. And what a dreadful business it was, growing in power as a vampire, drinking galleons upon galleons of blood, completing the often cruel tasks the system gave him for some experience, all to reach the next level of potency. Hoping that he'll achieve some real power before the countless shits polluting this world decide to hit the fan and make everyone's life miserable. Then again, he does the same thing. Even those who only met him for a day, for a few moments. Those whose interests went against his, or those who had the misfortune of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. At least, Max is happier with me in her life, he thought. The same couldn't be said of poor Vicky Vale, who was so unlucky that she attracted both his and the system's attraction. That's what happens when you're a canon character. Task. First taste of the spotlight. Objective. Feed from Vicky Vale, the first prominent figure you have encountered in this world. She is both ambitious and driven, making her a valuable source of power. Successfully feed from her without causing suspicion or harm, and ensure that your actions leave her unaware of your true nature. Use charm, subtlety, and your abilities to draw her closer. Rewards. Plus 100 EXP. New ability unlocked. Dominate enhances your control over the minds of your targets, allowing you to implant suggestions and alter their memories temporarily. Bonus objectives optional. Seduction. Gain her trust and affection. Plus 50 EXP. Failure penalty. Loss of Vicky's trust, resulting in a potential enemy and negative reputation impact in Gotham's social circles. It was tempting, too tempting to be ignored, so once more John Harker would set out to hunt. Vampire Rule Number 20. Blood is lives. The Gotham Gazette was a far cry from its former glory. Once a beacon of journalistic integrity, the newsroom now felt more like a corporate battlefield, with reporters jockeying for the best stories and editors more concerned with clicks than quality. The constant hum of phones ringing and the clatter of keyboards filled the air, but there was a palpable sense of frustration among those who still cared about real journalism. Among those dreadfully boring, stale-blooded meatbags, as a certain vampire would call them, was a certain pretty blonde with a quick mind and big dreams. Dreams. Her job was shattering with every passing day. Vicky Vale was still at her desk, buried under a pile of notes, her once neat and tidy workspace now a chaotic mess of papers, coffee cups, and half-eaten sandwiches. Not the best diet, but the only one that accommodated her work schedule. She sighed, running a hand through her hair, wondering how her career had come to this. She'd worked her butt off, tried to prove herself time and again, but it seemed the higher-ups were intent on keeping her down. The kind of stories she wanted to tell, the ones that mattered, were being sidelined in favor of fluff pieces and corporate-friendly content. Vicky had always dreamed of breaking big stories, exposing corruption, and making a real difference in Gotham City. Instead, she was stuck writing about socialites and fashion trends, while the real stories were handed off to the more cooperative reporters. if they could even be called real at this point. She glanced around the room, watching as her colleagues hurriedly typed away. Across the aisle, Steve Dawson, a slick reporter known for his close ties with certain powerful individuals in Gotham, was deep in conversation with their editor-in-chief and Old Man Gus' own boss, Roger Warren. Vicky couldn't hear what they were saying, but she didn't need to. It was the same old story. Steve would get the front-page story, and Vicky would be relegated to the lifestyle section. Vicky let out a heavy sigh and leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Just as she was about to start on her article, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Morning, Vale. You look like you could use a vacation." A sickly sweet, Chihuahua-in-a-bag voice violated her ears in a way only that hot piece in Brideshead should. Bloody hell, Vicky. She was horrified by herself at this point, but utter shame and penance could come later. She had other bitches to deal with. Vicky turned to see Lisa Connors, one of the senior reporters, standing behind her desk with a smirk on her face. Lisa was the kind of woman who had clawed her way to the top, and she wasn't shy about reminding everyone how she got there. "Morning, Lisa," Vicky replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. "Just trying to get this article done." "Another gala piece?" Lisa asked, glancing at Vicky's screen. "Yikes. Guess you didn't get the memo about playing the game." "I'm not interested in playing games, Lisa. I just want to do my job." Vicky resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "Whatever." Lisa chuckled and shook her head. "That's your problem, Vicky. You're too idealistic. This isn't about journalism anymore. It's about survival. You want the big stories? You've got to make nice with the right people. Otherwise, you'll be stuck writing about galas for the rest of your career." The woman reached her hand, with long painted nails that made her look more like an escort than a reporter, and lifted a strand of Vicky's long blonde hair. "You could go really far, Vicky, if only you knew how to use all the weapons at your disposal." "Thanks for the advice, Lisa." Vicky clenched her jaw, refusing to rise to the bait. "Anytime," Lisa replied, flashing a fake smile before sauntering off to her desk. Vicky stared at her screen, the words blurring as her frustration boiled over. She knew Lisa was right, at least partially. The Gazette had changed, not for the better. But Vicky wasn't willing to compromise her integrity just to get ahead. She wanted to earn her success, not pillow talk her way into it like some of her colleagues. As she tried to refocus on her work, Vicky caught a glimpse of the janitor, Marcus, sweeping the floor nearby. Marcus was new. He'd only been working at the Gazette for a few weeks, but he had a friendly demeanor that made him easy to talk to. That wholesome, salt-of-the-earth grandpa charisma. He'd struck up a conversation with Vicky a few times while she was staying late, and she found his down-to-earth attitude refreshing compared to the cutthroat environment of the newsroom. "Hey, Marcus," Vicky called out, more out of a need for a distraction than anything else. Marcus looked up from his sweeping and gave her a nod. "Morning, Miss Vale. How's it going?" Same old, trying to get this article done, but it's hard to stay motivated when you know no one cares." Vicky shrugged. "Ikare. I mean, I don't know much about writing, but I always like reading your stuff. Feels more real, you know?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Thanks, Marcus. That means a lot." Vicky couldn't help but smile. "No problem," Marcus said, leaning on his broom for a moment. "But, if you don't mind me saying, you look pretty stressed out. Something bothering you?" Vicky hesitated. She didn't usually vent to people at work, especially not the janitor, but Marcus had a way of putting her at ease. "It's just this place," Vicky admitted. "It's not what it used to be. The stories that matter aren't getting told, and the people in charge don't seem to care. It's all about clicks and keeping certain people happy. I feel like I'm wasting my time here." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds rough, but you know, sometimes you've got to fight for what you believe in. Maybe it ain't easy, but if anyone can make a difference, it's you." "Thanks, Marcus. I needed to hear that." Vicky gave him a grateful look. It was just words, though, and not the kind she could put on a paper to get ahead. "Anytime, Miss Vale," Marcus said with a smile before getting back to his work. As Marcus moved on, he made a mental note of everything Vicky had said. His true purpose at the Gazette wasn't to clean floors. It was to gather information. And what he'd just learned was exactly what his employer, John Harker, needed to know. Later that evening, Marcus arrived at John Harker's apartment in Gotham Heights. The place was a culture shock for those who came from the grimy streets of Brideshead. It was tastefully furnished, with an air of understated elegance that spoke to John's growing wealth and influence. The young man could be a millionaire if he didn't give so much money away. Marcus, now back to his real name, Marlin, had been one of John's most loyal followers since the night John saved him from a brutal beating in an alley. He'd been an addict, a nobody, but John had seen something in him, something worth saving. Now, Marlin was clean, focused, and determined to repay the man who'd given him a second chance. He knocked on the door and was promptly let in by Reginald, John's newly appointed retainer. Reginald, now wearing a tailored suit that made him look more like a businessman than the ex-junkie he once was, led Marlin into the living room where John was waiting. John sat in an armchair, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp as ever. He gestured for Marlin to sit. "Marlin," John said with a slight smile, "what do you have for me?" Marlin took a deep breath before he began. "It's like you thought, boss. The Gazette is a mess. Most of the reporters are just in it for the numbers, and the higher-ups are keeping the real stories under wraps. Vicky Vale. She's different, though. She's frustrated, angry even. She wants to make a difference, but they're holding her back." One of the other reporters, Lisa Connors, basically told her that if she doesn't put out, she'll be stuck writing fluff pieces forever. "Oh," John's smile widened, but there was none of the warmth and charm. It was an ugly, angry smile if Marlin had ever seen one. "And what did she say to that?" "She didn't like it, not one bit," Marlin replied quickly. "But here's the kicker." One of the editors, Roger Warren, also implied that if she were more affectionate with the right people, she might get better assignments. She wasn't having any of it, but you could tell it got under her skin. Did you happen to catch how she reacted to that? With every word he spoke, John was getting more pissed. "She was disgusted," Marlin said, "but also, I don't know, maybe a little desperate, like she's trying to figure out what to do next." "Good work, Marlin. This could be just the opportunity we need." John leaned back in his chair, thinking. Reginald, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. "Shall I prepare the next steps, boss?" he asked. "Please do," John confirmed, "and see what you can find about this Roger Warren and Lisa Connors. Vampires don't like it when people try to mess with their sandwiches." The next few days at the Gazette were a blur of frustration for Vicky. Just as John had planned, she was assigned one meaningless story after another. A profile on a local bakery, a piece about a charity auction, nothing that even came close to real journalism. Each time she pitched a story with substance, it was shot down without explanation. The final straw came on Friday afternoon. Vicky had spent hours researching a potential corruption scandal involving a third-rate Gotham politician. She had the sources, the documents, everything she needed to break the story wide open. But when she presented it to Roger Warren, he didn't even bother to look at her notes. "Vicky, we're not running with this," Roger said dismissively. "What?" Vicky stared at him in disbelief. "Why not? This is a huge story, Roger. It could blow the lid off corruption in Gotham. No need to go hysterical." Roger leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed. "It's not the right fit for us. Besides, we've got more important things to cover. The mayor's office is hosting a charity gala next week. I want you on that." "Hysterical?" She'll show him hysterical if he continues running his fat-ass mouth. Now if her mother heard her thought, she would spend the next hour with soap in her mouth. But she was too angry to care at this point. "Another gala? Roger, this is insane. We're supposed to be a newspaper, not a PR firm for the city's elite." She bit out. trying to repress the anger and frustration. She wasn't too good at it, unfortunately. Roger's expression hardened. "You're out of line, Vicky. This is the kind of attitude that's holding you back. Now, unless you want to spend the rest of your career writing obituaries, I suggest you drop this and do your damn job." Vicky's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to scream, to throw something, but she knew it wouldn't do any good. With a final glare at Roger, she stormed out of his office and headed straight for the elevator. She needed to get out of there before she said something she'd regret. Or worse, something she wouldn't regret. As she reached the ground floor, Vicky stepped out of the elevator and nearly ran into Marlon, who was pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. "Whoa, sorry, Miss Vale," Marlon said, stepping back. "It's not your fault, Marcus. I can't take it anymore. This place is driving me insane." Vicky shook her head, trying to calm down. "That bad, huh? Want to talk about it?" Marlon frowned, concerned. Vicky hesitated but then sighed. They don't care about the real stories, Marcus. They only care about what's easy, what's safe. I have a story that could actually make a difference, and they won't even consider it. I'm starting to wonder if I'm wasting my time here." The janitor paused, looking thoughtful. "Seems like a waste of talent, if you ask me. I've read your stuff. Got a good eye for the truth." Vicky chuckled dryly. "You're probably one of the few who think so. They've got me on stories that are as interesting as watching paint dry. Ever think about finding other ways to get your stories out?" the janitor asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. Vicky raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Just saying," he shrugged. "Gotham's a big city. Lots of people interested in the truth. Sometimes you gotta go outside the lines to get things done." She studied him for a moment. Something about the way he spoke was different, but before she could ask more, he simply nodded and went back to his work, leaving her to ponder his words. Later that night, as Vicky finally gathered her things to leave, she couldn't shake the conversation from her mind. She had no idea why, but something about it felt significant. When she stepped out of the building, she was surprised to see a familiar figure leaning against a sleek black car parked near the entrance. It was the same young man she'd met in Brideshead, the one with the striking blue eyes and an air of mystery about him, the one that helped both rise and lower her stress levels in the last few days, better or worse. "John?" she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Just happened to be in the area. Thought I'd check in on you." "Late night." John smiled, his presence as calm and composed as ever. It was the worst excuse in the history of excuses, but she didn't care. Sue her? Would any man complain if a tall, hot-as-heck chick that slightly aroused him showed up right after you had a very bad day at work? You could say that. The Gazette isn't exactly the friendliest place for someone trying to make a difference. Vicky chuckled, playing it cool, and closing the door behind her. No way in hell is she letting her coworkers see him. That but had her name written on it. "Mind if I walk with you for a bit?" he said, not quite shyly but not in his usual confident tone, just reserved enough to give her the urge to squeal. "Sure, I could use the company." She hesitated for a moment, wondering whether or not it was socially acceptable to do a victory dance in public, then nodded. It wasn't acceptable, unfortunately. As they strolled down the well-lit streets, Vicky couldn't help but notice how the shadows seemed to cling to him, making him blend into the night. There was something otherworldly about him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "Is this about that piece you're working on in Brideshead?" he asked, his tone casual but with a hint of curiosity. Vicky sighed. Work had to spoil everything. Even a walk can't be had in peace. Sort of. It's hard to get anything done when your bosses are more interested in keeping their friends happy than letting you do real journalism. I've been thinking, maybe I need to start looking for outside resources, you know? Get the stories out there some other way, she said, one sentence turning into two until she could put feelings into words. John's smile widened, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. I might be able to help with that. I have connections. People who might be interested in what you have to say. I could call in a few favors. Vicky stopped, turning to face him. Why? What's your angle, John Harker? She asked, only half teasing. This was Gotham, after all, and she might not be some brideshead or Park Row chick, but she knew better than to take candy from a stranger, no matter how attractive the stranger was. I want people to remember that places like Brideshead and Park Row exist, that they've been abandoned, left to rot while the rest of the city thrives. Maybe it's a bit idealistic, but I think you could shine a light on that. Remind Gotham of the people it's forgotten. He met her gaze, his expression sincere. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception. But all she saw was someone who, like her, wanted to make a difference. Or at least that's what she told herself. Okay, I'll bite. But if this turns out to be some kind of trick... Finally, she nodded.
No tricks, y promesa.
Just doing what I can. John laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to cut through the tension. As they continued walking, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Her work, his business ventures, the absurdity of Gotham's nightlife. They bantered back and forth, the initial tension easing as they found a rhythm. When they reached the corner where they'd have to part ways, Vicky hesitated. She wasn't sure what compelled her, but before she could overthink it, she blurted out, "You know, we should grab a coffee sometime." John raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. She seemed to have that effect on him. Was it a good or a bad thing? She honestly couldn't tell. Didn't care either as long as he kept looking at her like this. "Coffee? With you? I'd love that," he said with a grin, the kind of grin that implied he knew exactly what she was thinking and was very smug about it. "Great. I'll, see you around then." She smiled, relieved he hadn't made it awkward. As he turned to leave, she was grateful he didn't see the faint blush on her cheeks. She watched him disappear into the night, wondering what she'd just gotten herself into. But for the first time in a while, she felt a spark of excitement. The night had been more productive than John had anticipated. As he walked away from Vicky, a small smile played on his lips. Things were falling into place nicely. The next steps would require precision and patience, but he was confident in his ability to handle it. He had to. The rewards were too good to pass up after all. That, and spending some time around Vicky Vale wasn't that unpleasant. For now, though, he could relish the thrill of the hunt. Vampire rule number 21. Don't ever underestimate the power of a pointy stick, the basis of all human warfare. The Gotham Gazette's newsroom was abuzz with the usual clamor of journalists typing furiously, phones ringing, and the occasional shout over breaking news. Vicky Vale sat at her always cluttered desk, her mind still spinning from the whirlwind of recent events. The tip she received about the shady dealings of a wannabe crime lord had made waves, but it wasn't without consequences. The newsroom's whispers were growing louder, and the atmosphere felt thick with tension. Vicky leaned back in her chair, sipping her coffee as she reviewed the latest batch of intel. The phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. She answered, "Vale." "Vicky, it's Gus," came the familiar voice of the editor. "Got a moment?" "Sure, Gus. What's up?" "I've got some news for you. Let's chat in my office." When she walked into Gus's office, the elderly editor was leaning back in his chair, a half-smile playing on his lips. He motioned for her to sit. "Listen," Gus said, crossing his arms. "I've been hearing some grumbling around here. People are saying you're using, let's say, unorthodox methods to get ahead. Now, I know you're a hard worker, and the stories you've been bringing in are top-notch. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried about the rumors. I've heard them too. I assure you, Gus, it's just that I've been getting solid tips. And you know I wouldn't jeopardize my integrity for a few stories." Vicky sighed, not quite understanding what all the fuss was about. Keep your head low, and people will hound you about how you should get ahead, no matter what. Get ahead without spreading your legs, and now people complain because you didn't do it their way. as if blowing Ferris Boyle to get an exclusive interview was more legitimate than getting tips from people in the thick of the action, right there in Gotham's worst parts. I believe you, Vicky. I've seen you work too hard to doubt you now. But this city is full of snakes. You've got to be careful. Don't step on too many toes, or you might end up on the wrong side of a few. Gus's eyes softened, but his words were starting to put him on her wrong side. Don't step on too many toes. That's just another way to say she shouldn't tell the truth if it's too inconvenient. Thanks for the heads up, Vicky replied neutrally, standing. I appreciate your support. As she left Gus's office, she was met with the cold, critical stares of some of her colleagues. Scott, a journalist known for his cynical demeanor, was at the forefront. His gaze lingered on her with a mixture of disdain and envy. What's got them all riled up? Vicky asked, trying to sound casual. Oh, nothing much. Just the usual jealousy from those who don't play ball the same way. Scott sneered. Is that what they're saying? Vicky asked, eyebrows raised. That I'm playing ball? More like playing dirty. But, hey, if it works for you, who am I to complain? Scott's eyes narrowed. Vicky decided to ignore Scott's bitter tone and focused on her work. The intel John had provided her was invaluable. He had been discreetly feeding her information on smaller-time crime lords and scandals. These were nuggets of truth that, while not earth-shattering, were significant enough to get her noticed. Vicky had made a habit of using these tips carefully. She had published a piece on a corrupt local businessman who had been skimming from his own charity, information she'd gotten from one of John's sources. It had been a hit, and it felt like the walls of her career were finally starting to crack open. But with success came scrutiny. If she could just keep it up, just write a few more solid pieces, then she'll be able to get a proper camera crew and start reporting on the ground in places where she wouldn't get stabbed by a drunk hobo. Meanwhile, John Harker sat in his new study, the room bathed in the soft glow of a single desk lamp. He'd just finished a meeting with Reginald, who had come to report on the relative success of their various ventures. Reginald strolled into the room with his usual air of casual confidence. Dressed in a sharp suit that fit him well, he looked every bit the professional, though the street smarts and sass still lingered in his demeanor. You could take the fiend out of Brideshead, but you couldn't take Brideshead out of the fiend. John didn't say it, though, or his ever-so-loyal retainer would find a way to frame it as gay and lecture him on the virtue of saying pause and no homo. He dropped into a chair opposite John, a grin playing on his lips. Well, 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 Reginald said, crossing his legs. Seems like the stars are aligning, Mr. Harker. For the first time, all your businesses are showing a profit without needing to launder a shit ton of dirty money. Impressive. We've come a long way since the days of dodging bullets and trash cans. John smirked, leaning back in his chair. Indeed, Reginald said, eyes twinkling despite his lack of mind-reading tendency or intense affection for little boys and lemon drops. I must say, it's nice not having to cook the books as much. Cleaner money is so much more elegant. John chuckled. He could agree with that. We've built something solid here. The car-flipping business, the scrap metal venture, the hostel, and the cafe. It's all falling into place, he said, quite satisfied with it. And you're really going to expand into buying up property around your businesses? That's quite the ambitious move. Reginald raised an eyebrow. Absolutely, John replied. I want to create a buffer zone around our operations. A safe zone where drug dealing and violence are strictly off limits. It will protect our investments and the people working for us. Not to mention how his plan to clean up Brideshead would raise the property values on the grounds of it no longer being Crime Alley's drugged-up cousin. Now housing in Gotham would always be cheap, but buying everything while it was worthless just made more business sense. You're a real piece of work, you know that? Most people would just take their profits and run. But you're out here trying to clean up the whole neighborhood. Reginald shook his head with a grin. Just business, John said with a shrug. And a bit of pragmatism. I don't want to see our ventures jeopardized by petty crime. Plus, it's good for the community. Gives us a more stable foothold. Reginald looked at him with a look that said, I see right through your bullshit. But he had enough sense to refrain from asking unpleasant questions. I appreciate that. And speaking of handling things, we need to start cracking down on anyone who thinks they can skirt the rules. I want citizen patrols and stricter enforcement. No one gets to mess with our turf. John nodded. He still hadn't actually started buying out the property. But planning ahead was always a good thing. Just ask Batman. Get us some idle hands and prep them for the job if necessary. Prioritize men who lost people to this nonsense out there. Consider it done, Reginald said. I'll have our people on it. Perfect. Keep up the good work, Reginald. John smiled at the ghoul who gave him a mock salute. Now that would have been fine if he hadn't done it the Roman way. At least he didn't do this kind of stuff in public. It wouldn't be that good for his PR. John laughed as Reginald closed the door behind him. He leaned back in his chair, contemplating the next steps. He had a plan in place for expanding his empire and cleaning up Gotham, but he needed to be careful. Every move had to be calculated when you could still die from enough shotgun rounds in the head. One day he would be strong enough to just ignore everything and take a walk as he pleases, when he pleases with whoever strikes his fancy. One day he too would be a bona fide vampire. Vampire rule number 21. Don't stick your fangs in crazy. It was a calm night, with only 12 gunshots and screams of utter terror being caught by the aspiring vampire. Bang! Actually, make that 13. He thought, morbidly amused, picking up on the screams of a man who just executed his dear wife for having an affair with his father-in-law. Bang! I stand corrected. 14 it is. Truly a Gotham moment. The police sirens were ringing by the time he reached his destination, one of those self-aggrandizing hubs for insomniacs who enjoy oddly specific beverages. And he ain't talking about vampires. Smells pretty nice, John thought, taking a moment to enjoy the aroma of coffee beans as he stepped into the cafe. A small and rustic hipster magnet of a spot, with all the decorations and meaningful art one could expect from such a place. Instead of the standard seating arrangement, it was filled with many small closed booths, an absolute treat for people with social anxiety or those longing for more intimate discussions. Not his first choice, but he was the one getting asked out for a change, so it wasn't his problem. Now that was a strange thought. The vampire being invited by the prey is pretty ironic. He avoided the waiter, a lanky fellow with a well-groomed mustache and an oversized beanie, going directly for the plat du jour. It didn't take long for John to spot a familiar blonde head extending from one of the booths. A very distracted blonde head. Now that's just asking for trouble. The vampire walked soundlessly, for such is his nature. He towered over the booth, his long arms reaching out for each side as if to block the poor woman's escape. He cast a shadow over her, but she didn't seem to notice, a rookie mistake. Shower thoughts are to be left in the shower. Everyone knows that. Hi there, he said with a smile that only grew larger when she yelped, getting the attention of the staff and the few clients who gave any care to the outside world. Now, if he were an ordinary fellow, he might have gotten in trouble for stalking the lady and being a nuisance. His harmless prank would have summoned legions of Karens ready to strike him down with their fearsome nagging. Fortunately, though, John looked good, so all he got was a few chuckles. Now that was a cute sound, he said, taking a seat right in front of her. John, the flustered woman admonished, lightly reaching out under the table to strike his leg. Now, if it were an anime, she would have punched him in the face and made him bleed despite his superior durability. Unless it was a hentai, in that case she would have struck his third leg. I regret nothing, he said with a chuckle, but Vicky was wise enough to ignore him and order something from Beanie Guy. He took the opportunity to check her out, study her current attire. She had shed her coat, leaving it lying beside her, so he could clearly see her white-collared, knee-length black dress, her long, stockings-covered legs and brown boots. To this, he could only say one thing. Stockings are justice. "You look incredible," he said, leaving out the light degeneracy. That kind of stuff should only be said after putting a ring on the woman's finger. "Thank you," she smiled adorably. The kind of smile that disarmed more than one person before she stole and revealed their dirty little secrets. "You clean up nicely too. My skincare routine is bathing in the blood of virgins." He wanted to say it, but understood that all relationships required sacrifices. A rather awkward silence was about to set in, but they were rescued by the one and only beanie guy. "Here you go." He put 2 large cups on the table. 2 triple veni half-sweet non-fat caramel macchiatos with extra whipped cream, 2 pumps of hazelnut, a dash of cinnamon, no foam, light ice, and a drizzle of chocolate on top. Even as a world-hopping aspirin vampire, John was confused. "Thanks." Vicky, on the other hand, was not. He sipped some of the suspicious beverage, let his transformed taste buds do their jobs, and then formed an educated opinion based purely on his subjective perception. "I prefer black coffee." "That's boring," Vicky said. "No, it's inclusive," he said, then continued before she could process his words. "How's the job treating you? Heard some pricks were giving you a hard time." There was a second question in that sentence. Did she want his help dealing with them? Their little arrangement was rather simple. He'd help her get information and proper equipment and use his connections to keep her superiors out of her case. And she'd rise in the ranks until such a time when she could actually cast a light on those responsible for the social and economic disaster known as Brideshead and the whole East End to a lesser extent. The why or how of John's involvement with her career was still a mystery for her, one she tried and failed to uncover, but there was no way it was simple altruism guiding his actions. Same old, the paperwork and office politics trying to kill your soul, folks mocking you for only getting fluff pieces, and then complaining when you get some solid stories without begging the higher-ups like a good puppy. She went on a small rant, holding the cup close to her mouth, and John let her unwind. His only participation to the discussion were the occasional HM and "that's crazy," just enough to show her he's listening, but not enough to end her momentum. And then that bastard Scott had the gall to say that I only got so far because of my looks. He practically shouted it in front of everyone. Can you believe it? She shook her head, an angry frown marring her beautiful features. "Sounds like a gaping butthole," said the man who drinks blood to survive. Vicky nearly choked on her overly fancy coffee, and he quickly reached out to pat her back. "Ha ha ha. What the heck? What? Is that an actual insult?" she asked, her righteous anger changing into some type of mirth. Talk about mood swings. Women. John raised his cup of coffee. Somewhere in the cursed world of social media, somebody's day was ruined because of a single word accompanied by the best of beverages, barring blood. "I don't know, but it fits him," he answered, smiling gently. "It really does." She nodded with a small grin, looking at him as if she suddenly discovered new depths to his character. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were one of those fake, self-absorbed douchebags who thinks the whole world should bow down to them because they're hot. But you're really a good listener. I feel much better already. Should I just presence blitz her and be done with it?" He wondered, something he asked himself daily. Nah, she's being cute. It would make feel bad. That would be the most pragmatic choice. He was wasting precious night hours drinking pretentious coffee in a hipster bar, hours he could spend feeding, finding people he could feed from, and using the blood he got from feeding to beat down some drug-dealing punk. Enjoying life. However, his scummy action quota was already completed for the week, and the same thing for his abusing emotional manipulation quota. If he were to ignore it and go overboard, he might just start getting bored. To an ageless vampire, there was nothing worse than boredom. Unaware of his dilemma, Vicky reached out to grab his hand, a sinful action he couldn't help but reciprocate. Lewd, the most degenerated parts of his brain called out, a consequence of the horrifying ordeals he went through to gain his place in this world, or his use and abuse of the internet. It might also be both, but that was neither here nor there. The two of them shared a moment, something more intimate than the shallow seduction of his many single-use human blood bags, something built on genuine appreciation. Her appreciation for his character, his appreciation for her blood quality, truly the most sincere of romance. It wasn't long before they left the cafe after paying for their obviously overpriced drinks, but John supposed they were also paying for the experience. There was something slightly heartwarming about the way she linked their arms as they walked, subtly guiding him to her home, talking about things as inane as her funny coworkers or this and that spot in the neighborhood and how it changed from her childhood. At the end of the day, even a Gotham girl is still just a girl. That's me, she said, reluctantly freeing his arm as they stepped in front of a fancy apartment building, the kind with an actual doorman. I had a great time. Me too, John said, looking at her with those intense blue eyes of his, as if he were seeing right through her, as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world.
I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry.
He thought. Her blood was all but asking to be drunk. He reached out and held her close, embracing her carefully as she yelped and froze before melting into him. His hands slid through her hair, massaging her scalp in the right spot to both please her and make her move her head to give him access to that beautiful, appetizing neck. Thanks for the meal, he thought, his fangs expanding as he delivered a kiss, piercing through her flesh and giving her a taste of that higher pleasure. Moan. Her blood was different from the rest he's drank, much sweeter, much stronger than anything he's drank so far. I'm sorry, Max, but she has you beat. It took all of his will to stop feeding before he started actually damaging her. He licked the wound close and enjoyed the last few drops while she all but collapsed in his arms. That was, she said, panting, looking at him with wide baby blue eyes that couldn't understand what just happened. Incredible, he finished, capturing her lips for a less enjoyable but just as fulfilling kiss. Task completed. First taste of the spotlight. Rewards. Plus 100 EXP. New ability unlocked. Dominate. Enhances your control over the minds of your targets, allowing you to implant suggestions and alter their memories temporarily.
Bonus objectives, optional.
Seduction. Gain her trust and affection. Plus 50 EXP. Completed. You've successfully fed on a noteworthy individual. Vicky Vale has added unique qualities to your power, unlocking new potential. The essence of her influence and status amplifies your growth. Experience points gained. 750 XP. Yes, John whispered. It was simply incredible. Do you want to see my home? Vicky asked, once more making the fatal mistake of inviting a vampire. But if those are her wishes, who is he to deny her? Vampire rule number 24. Drinking your ghoul's blood might be cannibalism, but that ship has already sailed. John Harker was sitting comfortably in a house he could only afford thanks to Gotham's insanely affordable real estate prices, which might have something to do with the psychotic murder clown regularly escaping from the asylum. In his hand was a cup of coffee, one that didn't cost an arm and a leg because it contained the soul of a lobster or whatever excuse the barista felt like using at any given moment. Yes, he was still bitter about it. Sue him. Haha. Bitter. Get it? John thought, but the voices in his head still didn't answer. Bloody hell. I'm really lonely. Bloody. At moments like this, he wished the system was sentient and conveniently had the voice of a very attractive girl who'd somehow fall for him despite his obvious lack of sanity, integrity. Then he'd start thinking and realize it was a very bad idea. Level 5. Name, Jonathan Harker. Age, 16. Titles. Started from the bottom, jailbait. Race, vampire. Fledgling. Blood points, 600/800. EXP, 900/200. Level up. When he looked at that red panel blocking his field of vision, John saw more than a few numbers and completion bars, more than the blatant manipulation to try and make him focus on the grind. He saw the culmination of years of efforts and suffering. There was no truck-kuin, no celestial lottery ready to give him the jackpot, and nobody took pity on him and decided to yoink him out of Earth Prime and give him suck-him powers for shit and giggles. Nah, everything he has, he earned it. Every single thing. If he could jump over whole houses, it's because he almost had cut off his leg when he was but a frail human. If he could twist people's hearts, it's because he did in fact cut off his own leg at some point. He wasn't some weak, gutless moron obsessed with seeing numbers going up. However, level 5, blood points, 600/800, EXP, 900/200, haha, numbers go brr. Level 6, blood points, 600/1000, EXP, 700/400, more, he tweaked. Level 7, blood points, 600/1200, EXP, 300/600. Now that's a lot of levels, he said to absolutely nobody. Reginald was off with the extensive team of lawyers and accountants he hired to make sure he didn't start bleeding money instead of making it through his increasingly numerous and paperwork-heavy ventures. John did make sure to keep them loyal through a very liberal usage of presents and just enough love bites to keep them honest and looking for more balm for their souls and deep-rooted daddy issues. But when half your dough came from the hands of drug fiends, both current and recovering, getting someone with actual street smarts to ride with the pencil pusher seemed like a good idea. Pity it left him alone and bored. Should I call Max? He considered. He could think of 2 very good reasons to go bother his very first blood doll. Her dark humor and sharp wits, you filthy degenerates. Nah, she's too tired trying to make that cupcake thing work. I can't just go around keeping her awake at night before a workday, he reasoned. Because vampires could indeed be reasonable and do normal, considerate things like letting a broke girl sleep instead of waking her up or watching her all night like some bloody stalker. And yes, it was a pun. Vicky was also too tired and way too lost in the sauce of her first time getting eaten. In more than one way. She needed time to recover. The rest of his bitey calls were much too boring to call up for anything but a meal and some debauchery, something he wasn't really up for. It only left one thing. Time to go bully some drug dealers, he announced, getting up and cleaning his cup like a proper civilized person before leaving his non-rat-infested home and enjoying yet another trip in a hallway that lacked piss puddles, used needles, and the smashed hopes and dreams of those who lived there. Now, one of the cons of living in the better parts of town was how far the nearest drug corner really was. It sounds much worse than it truly is. John had no intention of ever buying drugs. He was only going there to physically and psychologically abuse the dealers for their career choice in order to maybe possibly scare them straight, something he enjoyed immensely. Brideshed's biggest drug enterprises and their not-so-friendly owners were currently trying to keep a low profile. Their own boys got too battered and way too scared to start dealing in the same streets that saw them getting beaten to a pulp and robbed blind by the local self-righteous freak show. But there were still many an independent too bold or foolish to take the hint and go on some vacations. Failing that, he could also take a look in Park Row. That place was less open-air drug market and more absolute hell on earth, but he'd probably find a couple working corners. Yeah, let's go for Crime Alley this time, he decided on a whim, then went on a walk. Park Row, known as Crime Alley to most, was infamous for its degeneracy, a hub for every illicit trade imaginable. It was an area that had fallen so far from grace that even the police barely bothered anymore. If Brideshead was the heroin capital of Gotham City, then Park Row was home of the violent crimes, a pipeline to fill up both Blackgate and Arkham Asylum. Rapists, psychopaths, and other serial killers walked side by side with the more financially inclined organ traffickers, kidnappers, and producers of high-quality torture porn. There were, of course, some more ordinary criminals in the mix, drug dealers, thieves, and muggers taking advantage of yet another land abandoned by the city and thus safe from the boys in blue and their batons of justice. Or guns of justice if your skin were darker than average. Now the only problem was the Bat and his little batlings, but that guy was mighty considerate, very rarely inflicting irreversible damage and sometimes even saving the criminals from their fellow violent scumbags. A price worth paying for those who choose a life of crime, and there were enough of them in this one place that they could sleep easy knowing that the stats were in their favor. If they were smart enough to understand stats. All lived in harmony until a freaking vampire attacked. He heard them before he saw them. Two thugs standing on a street corner, dealing to a group of desperate-looking addicts. The addicts took their bags of poison and scurried off, leaving the dealers to count their ill-gotten gains. John stayed hidden in the shadows, listening to their conversation. "Man, this shit is gold," the first thug, a short and scrawny guy with a ratty mustache, said as he pocketed the cash. "These junkies'll pay anything for a taste." His partner, a larger, dumber-looking brute with a shaved head, grunted in agreement. "Yeah, but keep it low, man. Last thing we need is someone catching wind. The bat might be gone, but word is there's some freak around Brideshead messin' with our business. The bat is gone." They loved saying that, hoping that this time it'll be for good. John, however, knew that his lack of action was either the result of some heavy wound or trouble outside Gotham. Yeah, I heard. Monster at Brideshead or something," the first thug scoffed. "I bet it's just some crazy bum. Besides, we aren't in Brideshead." "Whatever, man. Just keep watch. Ain't nobody messin' with us tonight." John smirked to himself, lowered his hood, and put on his improvised face mask, then decided to make his move. He stepped out from behind a pile of garbage bags, moving like a shadow. Before the thugs could react, John was upon them. He grabbed the larger one by the back of his neck and slammed his head into the wall, hard enough to leave a dent. The thug crumpled to the ground, unconscious, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. He's probably all right, John thought. Unless the Arkham games lied to him, the thugs could take at least this much damage. The scrawny guy stared in shock, fumbling for the gun in his waistband. But John was too quick. With a flick of his wrist, John slapped the gun out of the thug's hand, sending it skittering across the pavement. "Look what we have here," John said, his voice way too jolly for someone who might have inflicted some permanent brain damage on somebody. "A couple of enterprising gentlemen making a living the old-fashioned way. Who the hell are you?" The thug stammered, backing away, his eyes wide with fear. John smiled, revealing a flash of fangs. "Just a concerned citizen, doing his part to clean up the neighborhood." The thug's eyes went even wider. "Oh shit, you're the monster of Brideshead." John raised an eyebrow, slightly amused that his nickname had spread this far. "So you've heard of me? Good. That'll make this easier." The thug turned to run, but John was on him in an instant, grabbing him by the collar and lifting him off the ground. He held him there, dangling, as the thug struggled and kicked. "Let's have a little chat," John said calmly. "You're going to tell me who you work for, where the stash is, and why you're stupid enough to still be dealing in my city." 1 minute and a puddle of piss later, the poor guy received the sweet mercy of John's fist of love right in the face, this time carefully enough not to accidentally kill the man. Thud. He let him go casually, allowing him a nice nap in his own urine until he either woke up or got done in by some sickos. Hopefully, the booty warrior won't pass by. John then turned his attention back to the unconscious brute. He rifled through the guy's pockets, finding a few $100s, a switchblade, and a couple of bags of dope. Pocketing the cash, John tossed the rest into the dumpster. "One down, a few more to go," John muttered to himself as he melted back into the shadows. As he moved deeper into Park Row, John encountered more small-time dealers and their runners. Each encounter was a variation of the same theme. He'd appear out of nowhere, incapacitate the muscle, and interrogate the lackey. Sometimes he'd test his dominatability, planting a single word in their minds and watching them follow it like obedient dogs. "Run," he'd whisper, and they'd sprint off into the night, not stopping until they collapsed from exhaustion. "Drop," and their weapons would clatter to the ground as they stood there, dumbfounded. He found it amusing, but the power had its limits. He noticed that more complex commands, like, "Tell me everything you know," required a heavier dose of presence to make the thugs pliant enough. And even then, the stupider ones needed a bit of physical persuasion, an arm twisted behind their back or a knee to the gut, before they'd spill their secrets. I often fantasize about dropping the soap in prison. A 2-meter-tall, tattooed hulk of a man blurted out when John asked what he was hiding. "You know what? Forget it, go to sleep." He told him, using dominate on the final word. John's favorite part, though, was messing with them. He couldn't resist the opportunity to have a little fun at their expense. Following an unwillingly given tip guiding him to the oddly quiet second floor of some dingy bar with way too little traffic to stay open, he came across a group of 3 thugs standing around a makeshift table, counting money and divvying up bags of heroin. He crept up behind them and, with a quick flick of his fingers, knocked over one of their stacks of cash. "Whoops," John said, as the money scattered across the table. The thugs jumped, their hands going to their guns. But before they could do anything, John had already grabbed one of them by the collar and yanked him back. "Easy there, boys. I'm just here to help," John said with a grin, flipping the guy he was holding over the table. The thug landed with a grunt, knocking over more of their neatly piled cash. "F your help." The other 2 thugs pointed their guns at John, but he was quicker. With a flash of movement, he disarmed the first one, twisting the gun out of his hand and tossing it into the street. The second one, a twitchy guy with a face full of acne scars, tried to pull the trigger, but John was on him in an instant, slamming his head into the table and sending him crashing to the ground. "Now that was a very mean thing to say," John said calmly. The first thug, now gunless and panicking, took a wild swing at John, but John ducked easily and landed a punch to the thug's gut that knocked the wind out of him. The thug doubled over, wheezing. "Listen," John said, picking up one of the bags of heroin and holding it up to the light. "This stuff is garbage. You're peddling poison in a place that's already rotting from the inside. Have you no shame?" The thug on the ground groaned, trying to push himself up. "We're just trying to make a living, man. We ain't got no other way. You could always try getting a real, honest job like a Minecraft YouTuber or crypto influencer. But I guess it's too late for that now, isn't it?" John shook his head, tossing the bag aside. "What?" was the man's simple answer. With that, he grabbed the thug by the collar and slammed him against the wall, holding him there as he rifled through his pockets. More cash, more drugs. John pocketed the money and tossed the rest on the ground after breaking the vials. "Tell your boss that Brideshead is off limits. And if I catch you here again, well, let's just say it won't end well for you." The thug nodded frantically, and John let him drop to the ground. "Sleep," he ordered, and with the slightest drop in his blood reserves, the man was gone in the dreamland. The vampire was nearly gone when he remembered that his mother didn't teach him to waste good money. She didn't teach him anything, but that was neither here nor there. You know what? On second thought, John scooped up the cash, stuffing it into his coat pocket. Consider this a donation to the Keep the Boss Entertained fund. He walked away, leaving the thugs groaning in the alley behind him. By the time John reached the edge of Brideshead, the moon was starting its descent, and he could feel the first hints of dawn creeping closer. But he wasn't done yet. He still had one more stop to make. He found the last group of the night huddled around a fire in a trash can, smoking and chatting like they didn't have a care in the world. Independent dealers, most of them still in school from the looks of it. Small fry trying to carve out a piece of the pie while the bigger players were distracted by the chaos in the city. John approached them silently, his presence masked by the darkness. He stepped into the light of the fire, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. "Nice night, isn't it?" he said casually. The dealers jumped, startled, and reached for their weapons, but John was already moving. He disarmed the first one with a swift kick, sending the gun skittering into the fire. The second one swung a crowbar at him, but John caught it mid-swing and yanked it out of the thug's hands, tossing it aside. "Hey, hey, take it easy," one of the thugs shouted, backing away with his hands up. "We don't want any trouble, man." John smiled, fangs concealed. "Too late for that. Now, why don't you boys tell me what you're doing in my neighborhood?" "We didn't know it was your turf," the thug stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "We're just trying to make a few bucks, that's all." "Is that so?" John said, stepping closer. The thugs flinched, backing away further. "Well, let me give you some advice. The next time you think about selling your junk in Brideshead, you might want to reconsider. Because if I catch you here again..." He let the threat hang in the air, his red eyes burning bright in the night. The tiniest bit of presence was enough to make sure they'd never forget. The thugs nodded frantically, stumbling over each other as they tried to get away. Yeah, we got it. We're gone." Well, he could have started beating on school children selling a package for pocket money, but that wasn't really his style. "Leave the children to the priests," his uncle would always say. He was a clergyman. John watched them scramble into the night, then turned his attention to the fire. He fished out the gun with a stick and tossed it into the dumpster, then kicked dirt over the fire, smothering the flames and silencing that voice that kept telling him to stop being stupid and get out of there. "Well, that was fun," he muttered to himself, brushing off his hands. "Maybe I'll do this again tomorrow night." What he didn't know was that his next night in Gotham would be much, much more interesting. Vampire rule number 25. Power is power, soft, personal, financial, or otherwise. Be sure to cultivate lest your foes overtake you and drag you to your final death. "I kind of miss my nights as a humble crack house resident," John Harker thought, his blue eyes glaring at the offending piece of paper sitting menacingly on his desk. A paper surrounded by many others, so many of them that they formed a small pile. Forms, daily reports, monthly reports, more forms, bills from suppliers, bills from the state, and warnings from the Gotham City Council, who need to justify their cursed existence somehow, and decided that hounding a small East End business owner was the way to go. "To think that we're raising the rainforests for this," John growled. This was a shame, a bloody shame. The paperwork was unending, perhaps due to the limited amount of time he has each night to complete it in between 2 bouts of blood drinking and time spent in the field maintaining that sweet reputation of his. Or because of some curse put on those who achieved positions of power, forcing them to waste away as each available hour of their painful existence gets consumed by the wicked mountains of mind-numbing, soul-crushing, meat-limping paperwork. Slowly but surely, progress was being made, and John's most powerful enemy until now was facing a seemingly inevitable defeat. A demand to allocate funds to buy new equipment in that car-flipping business was allowed. A warning against a driver who tried diverting funds from the metal scrapping business was issued. A business plan to open that long-awaited home development and renovation company with Carl from the NA meetings was studied and considered before being approved. The man had a busted back, but he'd spent his entire house fixing and flipping houses for another man's fortune. He had skills and contacts that even his years wasted on opioids couldn't destroy. At least this time he'd actually get a fair wage and a percentage of the money he's generating. A better deal than anyone would offer a recovering addict with a criminal record, and he was the vampire. The desk was soon all but emptied, and John was already salivating at the thought of a future snack. Vicky had been hounding him for another date, and Max was enjoying a rare night of free time since they've opened that cafe/cupcake shop she always wanted. So many possibilities, so little time. It was the kind of problem John enjoyed having, the kind that puts a smile on his face while he approves the fitting of new toilets in the hostel after Greg from accounting busted the old ones yet again. I should probably deduct it from his salary, he thought, before remembering that man had recently made peace with his wife and was trying to get more involved with his kid's life. Nah, let's just send him a memo. With a stroke of masterful penmanship, the evil beast was subjugated, and our pointy-toothed hero ushered in an age of peace and prosperity for all the dope fiends, crackheads, and gin-breathed Rex to enjoy, until the former junkie attacked. "Evening, boss," Reginald said, pushing the door open with his hips and carrying something John couldn't see. "I've got something for you, your eyes only." "Oh no!" John's eyes shook, looking at yet another pile of documents being carried by his ghoul's enhanced arms. "Oh yes," the retainer answered with a shit-eating grin. "And it's all due for tomorrow morning." The retainer brought the cursed thing right up to his desk before bringing it down with a resounding thud. Though it sounded more like a crack to John's ears. Then again, it was hard to tell with the sound of his unbeating heart breaking. "You were the one who wanted to go all entrepreneurial and shit." Reginald, however, seemed to be having a lot of fun. "Too much fun. Remind me to give you a promotion," John said, and in his mind it sounded more intimidating than any speech he gave to a scared shitless drug dealer. However, dope fiends had the tendency to be a bit hardier than those who fed their addiction, given that they're the ones poking their veins with shared needles and getting beat up every once in a while when somebody was having a bad day. And quitting the junk did nothing to quell Reginald Cousin's indomitable crackhead spirit. "All right, whose shit do I have to eat next?" John said, playing with his pen, not quite daring to start reading that utter mess on his desk. That was the gist of his life as a businessperson, sitting his fancy arse on a fancy desk and being served plate after plate of shit from various sources. Shit he needed to deal with urgently, shit that demanded so much attention, money, and energy that he started contemplating whether or not he should just go full bloodthirsty murder hobo. Reginald laughed, and it meant nothing good. "Oh boss, today's a big bowl." The ghoul grinned, reading a carefully prepared overview he made during the day. "Helena, the grandma from the Thomas and Martha Wayne Rehab Center, got a problem from the bank blocking the donations for that third group you guys wanted to open by Park Row. A piece of shit idea, if I might say. Those folks are more about gouging someone's eyes out than caring about dope." "Mind your language." John rolled his eyes. "But that's true. They have so many problems over there that drugs seem more like an afterthought. See if we can put it down in Heights instead, or at least keep it in Brideshead." "What else?" John continued, leaning on his seat and looking at the ceiling, a much more pleasant sight than the pile of brain poison on his desk. "The drug users counting initiative is over, but the results are even more troublesome than we thought." He said and went on to explain how they sent 4 men all around Brideshead to count heads of active users, recovering addicts, and former addicts who still need help. Said men were weaned off drugs and subjected to a healthy amount of presence-based therapy to ensure their reliability. But it didn't seem to work that well. "Well, the good news is that you were completely right," Reginald said, scratching his well-groomed beard. "I usually am," John smirked. "Yeah, the official stats are completely bogus, but that's to be expected from the government," he continued without paying any regard to his vampire liege's obvious narcissism. "The nonprofits aren't much better. They all juke the stats so much it's not even funny. That was the whole reason for their little operation. If John wanted a drug-free area, then it would not only require knowing who's selling drugs but also who's buying them, how often, since when, and for which reason. It had nothing to do with the enticing prospect of getting more of that readily available, often skilled but always determined and appreciative labor force. "So what's the problem?" he asked. "Yeah, our guys did a great job going around the neighborhood making lists, but the problem is that they all got different numbers," Reginald explained. "And since pretty much everyone is known by a street name, getting them to give up their real one can be a pain. So we get about 4 dozen Big Ricks, 86 Fat Jims, and a whopping 200 fiends called Baby. Also, there's a beat cop making one of the driver's life difficult. He keeps stopping him and doing strip searches each time he sees his arse on the wheel." Reginald went, not leaving much time for the younger man to think. "And if you want to use your bullshit Jedi powers to get every fiend in the district clean before Bruce Wayne's illegitimate children start showing up, then you'll also have to find the time to move your white rear and go and rice on at least 80 people this very night." John could do nothing but groan and mumble something about going out to bust some kingpin's head like a watermelon for making this mess in the first place. "Is there anything even remotely interesting in this mess?" He couldn't help but ask. Nope, Reginald answered without popping the pea. Because he's a 30-something grown man and that would just be weird. John groans again. This ain't very Dracula of you, boss. Reginald shook his head. Vampires aren't known for their work ethics, John shot back. Or any set of ethics for that matter. It's hard to keep up with the whole sexual harassment/cannibalism thing they gotta pull to survive. Reginald checks over his paper one last time, hoping to at least raise his liege's morale. Failing that, he'll just order him some models. Wait, there is something, Reginald said, and John perked up directly, looking at him like one would a savior. Reginald Cousins, bane of the vampire's boredom. One of our guys in the street, Frankie the ex-convict, started helping out with the needle exchange when he ain't busy working with the car repairs crew. Frankie, who went to jail for having relations with a goat? John asked for clarification's sake. Allegedly, Reginald counters. Twice, John insisted. You want to hear it or not? Reginald raised a brow. Nah, I'll take the goat breeder over the paperwork. Thank you very much. John shook his head. Please do go on. Reginald chuckled at his master's antics. Yeah, he's come back this morning and reported that words on the street about Hungry and other big names in these corners getting their shit back together and coming back with the greatest bomb to have graced these streets in years. Oh, do tell. John smiled. That was promising. Hungry had been a great punching bag the last time they met. They've got a shipment of coke straight out of some Latino hellhole. A real blast, the best of the best. Big shots in all of East End bought their package at wholesale price, and they're about to use it all to buy even more of that good shit. All the action is supposed to be somewhere in Red Hook. Reginald said with a mix of respect and distaste only a former fiend could muster. Even when you no longer cared for the needle, a good blast was praiseworthy. The one with all the warehouses? John asked, racking his brain for that specific part of the city. Yep, the very same. Red Hook Industrial Storage Zone. Huh. That's a trap, John concluded. Obviously, Reginald nodded wisely, a knowing smile on his face. But it also means that most, if not all, of the manpower of Brideshead organized drug enterprises will be focused on a single spot, and there's no way in hell you'd pass up so much fun. John smiled in return, his fangs showing. Oh, you know me too well, my friend. Vampire rule number 25. A dead body is immune to poison. What is a man to do when given powers beyond measure? That's a pretty heavy question. Something worthy of its own 3-hour-long YouTube video essay. But as he stood on the edge of a 5-story building, the cold wind making a mess of his hair and his intrusive thoughts telling him to jump, John could confidently say that the answer was this. There was something undeniably cool about standing menacingly in a place where pretty much nobody could see you, which explains Batman, Spider-Man, and even Spawn's obsession with the whole thing. It wasn't just some ego trip, though. It served its purpose. John's perch was on the very edge of the urban development nightmare known as the Red Hook Industrial Storage Zone and high enough for his vampire eyes to see plenty of things. Very interesting things. He could also pick up on the noise of several people going at it and pinpoint the areas with the highest blood flows in their bodies, which appeared as red penile drawings on the periphery of his vision. This was considerably less cool. Why is there always someone fapping to tentacle hentai? Such were the thoughts of the modern-day Nosferatu. Not as glamorous as Dracula's misadventures impaling great amounts of more or less willing individuals, but beggars couldn't be choosers. At least I have a working shower. Don't see you beating that one, Vlad, John thought smugly. He could also see one of the warehouses being surrounded by many small groups of young men, patrolling with all the subtlety of a bunch of geezers after Liverpool lost 3-0. Fishy didn't begin to describe it. That said, the warehouse was also packed full of meat bags, which was a pretty good indicator of some nefarious business going about in there. Nefarious business that wasn't making him any money. Now he couldn't have that, could he? John counted a good 50 miserable piles of secrets up and ready for him to unravel in the most painful manner that did not involve a horse, lube, ditty, and a bunch of very successful Minecraft YouTubers. This is going to be fun, he muttered to himself, a smirk playing on his lips as he cracked his knuckles and put on his hood and mask. The monster of Brideshead was ready to play. He really needed a better name, but Crimson Bastard was sadly taken. John took a deep breath, something he didn't need to do on account of him being a living corpse and all, but it was still rather pleasant and a good habit if nothing else. Then he gave in to his intrusive thoughts and let himself fall. Yup, this is the life on life. He smiled, feeling his body flipping around as gravity did its work. Before he could pick up too much speed, though, he reached out with clawed hands and held onto the wall, slowly breaking his fall and doing a good amount of property damage he will never pay back. He moved like a shadow, casually slipping through the badly surveyed perimeter without a sound. The thugs stationed around the area seemed to be substandard compared to those he brutalized during his previous raids. Now, be it Hungry's crew or anyone else, street soldiers were soldiers only in name. They might take orders and lives, shoot guns, and bleed for the cause of a bunch of folks who care not for them, sacrifice everything to generate wealth for some corrupt prick, and take years to realize that there was no honor, no code, and no justice in their service. But they were not soldiers. They lacked equipment, proper skills, and tactical knowledge, and most of all, they had little to no discipline. However, all thugs weren't made equal. Compared to the morons patrolling outside, the gangbangers he took down in big stashes and prime territory seemed like exemplary warriors, stoic and well-trained as the best Roman legionaries.
Yo Cesare.
This is some good shit. The penny thugs in front of him, though, must be the lowest of the barbarian tribes. Live meat ready for crucifixion. What a shame. John shook his head, leaving his spot in the shadows. There was no point in stealth when the opponent was so pitiful. I hope it's part of their trap. As he approached one of the side alleys, a pair of low-life criminals, armed with rusty knives, spotted him. Hey you, this is private property, one of them yelled, trying to sound intimidating. Yeah? How about I make it public? John's grin widened. Before the thug could respond, John closed the distance in a heartbeat, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him off the ground. The other thug, shaking, tried to stab John in the side, but the rusty blade snapped as it made contact with his skin. Nice try, John said, before slamming the first thug into a wall, knocking him out cold. The second one, in a bout of lucidity, turned to run away, but John was already on him, delivering a swift kick to the back that sent him sprawling like Yamcha. Don't run, boys. The party's just getting started. John called after them, laughing as he watched them crawl away before succumbing to their wounds. More of them came to investigate, but they only joined the pile of moaning, broken bodies left on the sidewalk. Still better than paperwork, he thought, wiping his hands on one of his victims. Opponent's do-rag. With the perimeter guards dealt with, John made his way to the warehouse, the supposed heart of the operation. The place was old and decrepit, a perfect setting for the trap he knew was waiting. As he pushed open the heavy doors, a wave of tension hit him. The anticipation of a hunter entering the lair of his prey, the excitement of a no-life player about to trash some noobs. The interior was just as he expected, dark, cluttered with crates and old rusted-up machinery, and utterly reeking of ambush. John took a deep breath, savoring the atmosphere. He could sense the presence of several thugs hidden around the warehouse, their fear barely contained. Why they gave so much loyalty to their boss was beyond John's comprehension. It was almost admirable the way they were facing their doom or retardedly. Probably both. All right, boys, John called out, his voice echoing through the space and laced with just enough presence to make things interesting, just enough artificial fear to get their bladders working overtime. Let's get this over with. The thugs didn't need any more encouragement. With the courage of a cornered beast and all the reckless bravery of a student who knows nothing about the coming exam, they sprang out from their hiding spots, brandishing bats, crowbars, and knives, rushing toward him with a mix of bravado and desperation. Get him! Take him down! One of them shouted, swinging a bat aimed at John's head. "Screw it. I'm not getting paid enough for this shit." Another thug with an actual working brain dropped his butcher knife and ran away. "Smart guy," the vampire thought while breaking a wooden baseball bat on some unfortunate fellow's skull. "Might see about getting him a new job." John ducked under a crowbar swing, delivering a quick punch to the thug's gut that sent him flying backward. Another thug lunged at him with a spiked baseball bat, but John sidestepped the attack, grabbing the man by the arm and flipping him over onto the cold concrete floor. Crunch. That's what happens when you use an anti-zombie weapon on a freaking vampire. Rookie mistake. "Come on, is that all you've got?" John taunted as he effortlessly dispatched thug after thug. It might be a bit too cocky, but the beast within reveled in the display of superiority, always eager to remind the cattle of their proper place in the bloody food chain. His movements were fluid, his strikes precise. Even with little to no fighting skill, sheer brute force, resilience, and speed couldn't be denied. He was holding back just enough to enjoy himself. As he dealt with the last of the initial wave, a sudden movement caught his eye, a blur of motion that darted through the shadows. He would have missed it if not for the scent of blood, more potent than anything he'd ever had thus far. John barely had time to react before something, or someone, lashed out at him with lightning speed. He felt a sharp pain in his side as two metal claws raked across his ribs. Well, who do we have here?" John staggered back, more surprised than hurt. It slipped back into the shadows, and only then did he realize how bad of an idea it was to just throw unconscious foes around. He had no way of differentiating between them and this new opponent. For a few seconds, nothing happened, until a small move gave away his clawed enemy's position. John turned around and charged in the direction, only to come face to face with a bruised bald man crawling on all fours, heading for the exit. "Ooh-ee," the thug said hesitantly. "Piss off," John told him respectfully, and that was all the permission the man needed to jump on his feet and get the hell out of there. The vampire's mistake cost him yet another cut on his side, but all clouds have a silver lining. Using a bit more speed than he usually would to avoid dealing with that annoying little thing called physics that did very inappropriate things to his shoes, clothes, and the pavement when he wasn't very careful with his movement and balance, John turned around and grabbed the unsuspecting woman. Whatever, John believed in equal rights and equal lefts. "Slippery, aren't you?" John taunted, trying to catch her in a grapple, but she twisted out of his grasp with a snake-like agility, slithering around him and scratching him up further along the way. "A little more on the left, please," he said, squirming until her claws reached that itch on his lower back. "Yeah, that's the spot, baby." He was confident in his abnormality, but then again, he lived in Gotham, a place where folks like the Joker and Scarecrow went around causing mayhem every so often, so her lack of reaction didn't sting that bad. "Got you now," she hissed, locking her thighs around his neck and pulling him into a chokehold.
Es hora de que mueras, monstruo lamentable.
John grunted as her muscles tightened around his windpipe, cutting off his air. But instead of panicking, John chuckled, his voice strained but still amused. "Kinky," he rasped, before using his brute strength to pry her legs apart and toss her off him. Strangulation, deadly to humans, a minor inconvenience for the Strigoi. The killer landed gracefully on her feet, her eyes narrowing as she realized her venom was having little effect. "You're already dead?" she sneered, trying to hide her frustration. "Poison, huh? Should have figured. But I'm not your average corpse, sweetheart." John licked a bit of blood from his lip, grinning. A second was all it took for his partially crushed windpipe to heal, and the potent poison flowing in his body failed to accomplish anything on the biological madness that was his cursed, living carcass. He took the opportunity to take a look at his new toy. Playmate, he meant playmate? Or was it enemy? Meh, it's all the same really. She was a contortionist, bending and flexing her body in ways that defied human limits. Her short whitish blonde hair clung to her head, framing those unsettling yellow reptilian eyes. The black eyeliner she wore made those eyes stand out even more while also masking her features, giving her an eerie, predatory gaze that followed his every move. Her skin-tight outfit, made from some sort of snakeskin material, hugged her form, accentuating the tattoos that snaked across her upper body and arms. Each movement she made was fluid, graceful, like a snake coiling to strike. Did I mention that she looked like a snake? A very hot snake. Not furry? Or should it be scaly in this case? Food for thought. She was dangerous and quite obviously sadistic, but there was something oddly captivating about the way she moved and the way she looked at him. Copperhead John managed to identify her with some minor difficulty. Wasn't she supposed to be a weird snake dude? Whatever, he sure as hell wasn't going to complain. The assassin lunged at him again, but John was ready this time. He sidestepped her attack, delivering a quick jab to her side that made her wince. But before he could follow up, a new wave of thugs rushed into the warehouse, armed with knives, bats, and cheap pistols. Perfect timing, John muttered, as he quickly adapted to the chaotic battle. Copperhead took advantage of the distraction, disappearing into the shadows to plan her next move. As the thugs closed in, John couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. You guys really think you've got a shot? I'm starting to feel bad. He shook his head. One thug, clearly braver than the rest, swung a bat at John's head. John caught the bat mid-swing, yanked it out of the thug's hands, and smashed it across his knees, sending him to the ground with a scream. Bang! 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 One of the gangsters started shooting in John's general direction, but judging by the way he was holding his gun sideways, there was no need for the vampire to worry about him. Arg! Stop shooting if you can't aim. Shithead! One of the bullets ricocheted from the metal machines and struck one of them right in his shoulder, making him throw his weapon and scream in pain. At this point, John could just stand around and let them take each other out. Anyone else wants to try? John taunted as he grabbed a thug by the collar and threw him into a stack of crates where he knew Copperhead was hiding. Pandajo! He heard her hiss ever so slightly as she scurried away, trying not to alert him. Ha ha ha! He couldn't help but laugh, further terrifying the foolish men who thought money was worth being stuck in a room with the monster who humiliated their bosses in their own hideouts. Many of them were heavily considering switching jobs. They did hear about some guy hiring everyone from dope fiends to ex-convicts and paying decent money for what it was. They wouldn't make as much, but not getting their every bone broken might just be worth it. Those smarter-than-average hired muscles discreetly headed for the exit before making a run for it. Not the bravest thing, but there was no honor among thieves. The remaining, likely delusional thugs weren't exactly brilliant strategists. One of them, thinking he had the element of surprise, charged at John from behind, only for John to spin around and clothesline him. Man, you guys need better trainers, John said, shaking his head, holding one of them by the ankle and using him, a grown man, as a mace to beat on the rest of them. That's double the pain for every hit. Sometimes John's genius terrified him. As he finished off the last of the thugs, Copperhead reappeared, striking from above with a vicious slash aimed at his throat. John barely managed to dodge, feeling the air hiss past his neck as her claws missed by inches. Nice try, John said, grabbing her wrist and twisting her arm behind her back. Copperhead hissed in pain, trying to wriggle free, but John's grip was like iron. Her other clawed hand reached out to gouge out his eyes, the best solution when someone is grappling you. But then the most insane thing happened. Stop, he said, his voice deeper and more intense. And stop she did, despite the golden opportunity to kill or at least maim her target and despite her instincts honed through years of killing. Despite all the blood she had shed, whether it was to protect herself, to avoid sleeping with a hungry stomach, or just because she could, because someone was willing to pay and it was the only thing she was good for. When he gave her the order, all she could do was obey. Let's dance, he whispered in her ear before tossing her across the room. The spell was broken. Whatever that bruja had done to her mind was over, forever if she had it her way. Copperhead landed on her feet again, but this time she was slower to recover. John could see the frustration in her eyes as she realized she was losing control of the fight. "Just give up, darling," John said with a small smile, advancing on her. "You're fun, but I'm getting bored," Copperhead snarled, lunging at him with renewed fury. But John was done playing around. He sidestepped her attack, delivering a powerful punch to her gut that knocked the wind out of her and sent her crashing into a stack of dusty crates. She crumpled to the ground, gasping for air. John approached her, chuckling. "You're a tough one, I'll give you that. I think I'll keep you around. You'd make a great pet." He smiled kindly. Before he could reach her, the doors to the warehouse burst open, and the dozens of proper gangsters with proper guns arrived, the business ends of their rifles trained on both John and the injured Copperhead. "Estoy aquí, cabrones." "Hold your fire," she shouted, eyes wide. "We know, snake bitch." One of them laughed, joined by a few of his equally criminally inclined comrades. It made no sense. They were the ones who hired her and paid the cartels for her. The cartels who were already employing another Copperhead, a metahuman who could spit poison. The cartels made her kill the previous one after he tried retiring from the job. The cartels were humiliated after her defeat at the Batman's hands and the loss of the $50 million that Black Mask put on her head. Money they desperately needed to bribe officials, buy ships and planes with good pilots, and keep fighting the drug war one day at a time, in an age where every other politician wanted to be seen as tough on crime. The same cartels that made no efforts to try and break her out of prison despite their ability to do so, condemning her to a full year spent in Blackgate and another in Arkham Asylum before she found the opportunity to escape. The cartel which just double-crossed her.
Me cago en ustedes.
The assassin growled. She wanted to get angry, to scream and rage and use that fury to get out of this situation and kill the backstabbing hijos de putas who sold her out. But she couldn't. She just felt tired, very tired. Her target, though, seemed to be in a very good mood. "Man, this keeps getting better and better," John grinned. It was so much better than paperwork. Vampire rule number 26. Why be a parasite when symbiosis is an option? Make yourself so precious and necessary to mankind that opposing you, much less attempting to purge you, becomes utter self-harm and insanity. John Harker smiled wryly. On his right was a freaky, murderous snake lady. On his left was a merry band of assault rifle-carrying gentlemen with very lackluster trigger discipline. Both sides came here with the sole purpose of turning him past tense by any means necessary, so he'd usually just use some of that sweet, satisfying superhuman speed to get out of the way and let them deal with their own issues before stealth hunting them one by one. That would be the logical thing. But on the other hand, he did want to keep his new pet snake, and dozens of bullet-sized holes on its skin were neither good-looking nor practical. Someone might even call PETA. Now that would be ghastly. Moving out of the way while she's still recovering from his fist of love would surely end with her turning into Swiss cheese with tits. Trying to move her around with inhuman speed would work, but it would also snap her neck. Just ask Gwen Stacy. She'd answer if she weren't so busy being dead. What a dilemma, he thought, his smile growing by the microsecond. But time was ticking and he had to make a choice. Should I bail and let the snake lady fry? Or should I be a good little monster and save her skin? Hijos de puta, she cursed, her voice dripping with venom as she realized she'd been double-crossed. Her potty mouth at least drowned out the clicking sound of the basic yet crucial device in John's pocket. His decision was made. From now on, John Harker is an eco-activist. Pass him the glue and lead the way to the museum. He didn't have time for half measures. He spent some of his plentiful blood to further enhance his resilience, feeling his body surge with inhuman strength. Without another word, he sprang into action, grabbing Copperhead and pulling her into a tight embrace. "What the hell are you doing, cabron?" she snarled, wriggling in his grasp, but he held firm. The gangsters opened fire, bullets tearing through the air, slamming into John's back. His blood buff and healing worked overtime, patching up the many holes that were being punched into him. The pain was intense, searing through his nerves, and a lesser man would have screamed in terror. This is bloody metal. He couldn't help but think, even as he both felt and saw his reserves dwindle through the system interface, the hunger growing with each second. If it comes to that, Snake Girl probably wouldn't mind lending me a few pints. Said woman was currently shocked out of her mind, her heart going crazy as she felt her target. The man she was hired to kill, now the self-imposed barrier between her and those who seek to end her life. Copperhead felt his body shake and felt him groaning in pain, and yet he held strong. Droplets of his blood fell on her face, and she couldn't help but wonder. Why? Her voice couldn't be heard among the blazing gunfire, but she asked anyway. Her lips moved on their own. Bang! 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 The vampire currently role-playing as the uber-powerful Gimp, minus the insane abilities that made the whole masochistic fighting style possible, heard her full well despite the chaos all around as bullets battered his back and sent blood, flesh, and lead flying. However, he was too preoccupied with trying to keep his undead life to answer her newfound curiosity with some clever, albeit cheesy, quote that only worked because he looked good and was in the process of saving her life. Some other time, perhaps. Still, this situation is far from ideal, he thought, while a particularly precise or lucky gangster started tickling his spine with an M16. Running away wasn't an option. It would slow his healing, and that was the only thing keeping him from turning into a shredded piece of meat. Using presence wouldn't help either. The gangsters were too confident, too trigger-happy. His blood was better spent elsewhere. So he just stood there, taking the barrage, waiting for their magazines to empty or for something to give him an edge. The heavy gunfire began to slow as mags, not clips, ran dry, but before John could capitalize on the lull, a roar cut through the chaos. The cavalry was here. What the hell? One of the goons managed to blurt out before getting real intimate with a bumper. A black Toyota SUV with bulletproof glass rammed through the rusted-up warehouse doors, barreling full speed into the line of gangsters. The men barely had time to react before the vehicle plowed through them, bullets ricocheting harmlessly off the reinforced windows. Inside, Reginald Cousins was in a full-blown blood rage, his eyes wild as he floored the gas pedal. He'd received the call to action from his liege, and nothing was going to stop him. The gangsters scattered, trying to regroup, but the intervention gave John all the time he needed. His reserves were low, painfully so, but he could fix it in an instant. The assassin barely realized what was happening when he lowered his head, fangs bare, and pierced her neck. It was a credit to her that she didn't moan right away, but he could feel her relaxing and melting against him. He could see her shaking and hear her grinding her teeth, and then it came, ever so subtle, ever so quiet. Moan. Magnificent. Shit like this is why I get up in the evening. He smiled against her skin, his fangs still penetrating her neck and pumping out the best of her blood. With the first gulp alone, the first taste, John knew he had struck gold. Think of your favorite food, your favorite song, your favorite place, and your strongest orgasm to date. Add in the affection of your impossible crush and the realization of your wildest dreams and ambitions. Multiply by 10 and it would still pale in comparison. It was pure ecstasy for the both of them. So sweet, so powerful. He sucked and drank the red liquid in a frenzy, barely able to stop himself before hurting his new, beloved pet. Yes, there was no way he'd let her go now. Not such a fine fighter, not someone with such exquisite blood quality. Not his very first metahuman. Vital reserves replenished. Blood intake successful. All physical and supernatural reserves at full capacity. Blood points, 1200/1200. He barely drank a dozen pints, and yet it was more than 3 humans worth of potency. The only one to ever come close to this was Vicky Vale, and even she wasn't so absurdly enticing and rewarding. Both were characters that played roles, albeit minor ones, in the story of this world. Yet, for Copperhead's blood to have such superiority, The difference between a human and a trained metahuman was just that great. And what about aliens? Amazons? Kryptonians? What kind of power would he achieve if he could just have a taste of their vital essence? He was almost shaking in excitement. Congratulations. You fed on a noteworthy individual. Essence absorbed exceeds standard parameters. Metahuman traits detected. Agility and speed enhancements. Your power grows. That much was obvious. Metablood was unlike anything he'd had before. Reward processing. You have gained 2,500 experience points. Minor agility boost. Oh, daddy likes. He grinned, knowing full well what comes next. The gangsters previously discombobulated were starting to regain their bearings, pick up their guns, and would soon attempt to finish the job. Poor things. Status: Level 7. Name: Jonathan Harker. Age: 16. Titles: Started from the bottom, jailbait. Race: Vampire. Fledgling. Blood points: 1200/1200. EXP: 2900/600. Numbers going up, so beautiful. Level up? Darn right I will. He thought, and if his math were correct, things were about to change big time. Level 8 reached. Blood points: 1200/1400. EXP: 2300/800. Again. Level 9 reached. Blood points: 1200/1600. EXP: 1500/1000. Yes, he was once more reduced to inhumanly fast tweaking like a gotcha addict. Again. Level 10 reached. And then it came, the burning of his blood. The pain and pleasure merging together as his body twisted and changed so fast yet so unbearably slowly. Evolution. The next step in the totem pole of vampiric hierarchy. You have reached a new level of maturity. Neonate, the potency of your blood has reached that of a 50-year-old vampire. Physical traits and abilities have reached a new level of power. New ability developed. Blood manipulation. Status updated. Level 10. Name: Jonathan Harker. Age: 16. Titles: Started from the bottom, jailbait. Race: Vampire. Neonate. Blood points: 1200/3000. EXP: 500/5000. Yeah. He breathed out after licking the woman's wound close, his eyes burning red, a dangerous smile on his face. Time to go for a walk. Copperhead, now both thoroughly confused and considerably aroused, could only watch in shock as John gently let her go before leaping into the fray like a man possessed, ripping through the remaining thugs like a savage beast. His eyes were glowing red. For the first time, he didn't care if any of them made it out alive. They were all adults. Dumber than fourth graders, but adults nonetheless. In less than a second, he appeared right in the face of one of the armed gangsters. Before he could press the trigger, John grabbed his hand and simply pressed. Arg! No! Stop! Stop! He howled, watching in horror as his fingers were crushed and pressed into a pulp, blood leaking out of the now visible bones. John showed him mercy with his fist of love colliding with the man's ugly face, breaking teeth and bones and shattering his jaw as he was sent flying to what was most likely his death. Or at least the end of his life as an able-bodied man. Who's next? John asked calmly. His answer was a hail of bullets, but this time he needed not concern himself with a vulnerable charge. Copperhead had enough sense to get out of the day so he could disappear without worrying about her safety. Is he gone? One of them asked, not caring about their disastrously failed task or the mangled body of what was once his best friend since childhood. As long as he could get out of this hell alive, everything was acceptable. Above! Another said and started shooting, but unfortunately, it was too late. The last thing he saw was a boot getting dangerously close to his face, and then all went dark. John tore into them with ferocity, using the chaos to his advantage. The gangster's shots went wild, missing him entirely or grazing his already healing flesh. He didn't bother giving any of them the kiss, but he did drain a few as their blood spilled out, absorbing it into himself with his newfound abilities. Blood manipulation probably had better uses than a simple magnet guiding the spilled blood to his ever-so-thirsty throat while he ripped grown men to shreds. But he could figure it out later. He didn't practice or train to use it even at such a low level. Instinct alone was enough to guide him and let him learn how to move foreign blood and consume it without biting, using it to replenish his nearly full reserves and heal the rare wounds he sustained without cost. Copperhead was hiding behind the car. She wanted to move, to crawl away, but every time she glanced at the man, no, the monster, her mind was pounded with confusion. Who was he? What was he? And why was he protecting her? What did he do to her? How was he doing all this? Why did it feel so absurdly good? As the last thug fell to a fist in the throat, gurgling his final breath, John turned to Copperhead. She was still on the ground, her body twisted at an impossible angle, trying to decide if she should flee or strike again, even though it seemed like madness after seeing what he could do. But the decision was made for her when police sirens wailed in the distance. "Time to go," John said, grabbing Copperhead by the arm just as she attempted to slither away. He dragged her to the back of the SUV, throwing her inside before climbing in after her. Reginald didn't wait for any further instructions, flooring the gas and tearing through the night. Copperhead's mind was racing, thoughts crashing into each other like waves in a storm. Why had he saved her? What was his angle? Is he going to do it again? Did she mind doing it again? As if reading her mind, John chuckled. "Looks like you've been double-crossed." His grin was wide, almost boyish, as if his back wasn't still full of holes from the bullets he'd taken to protect her. His clothes ruined and reeking of copper and lead. She stared at him, eyes narrowed in suspicion. No one had ever done that for her. Ever. She'd been born and raised in the cartel, where everyone and everything was out to get her. She became an assassin to escape poverty, grape, or the misery of being a drug mule like her mother, who died when the package in her stomach broke and OD'd her. She was good at it too, only failing a handful of times during nearly 2 decades of murder. But the man she was supposed to kill had just saved her life. "Why?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous, but tinged with something else. Confusion, curiosity, and the lingering fear in her heart she couldn't kill. John looked at her, those slitted red eyes twinkling with mischief. "Because I wanted to," he said matter-of-factly. Then he leaned in closer, his grin turning into something darker, more predatory. "And you still didn't answer me? Can I keep you?" He was insane, and so was his driver, judging by the cackle that echoed from the front seat. "You really should. As far as bosses go, he's pretty awesome. If you don't mind the whole busting skulls thing," the middle-aged man said, and she listened intently, determined to gather as much intel as possible before. Before what? There was nothing left for her. Except... Her gaze turned to the young man sitting beside her. His eyes closed as he leaned back, full of openings she could use to attack. But something in Copperhead's chest tightened, something she hadn't felt in a long time. A strange, unfamiliar feeling, vulnerability, perhaps? Trust? Madness? Whatever it was unsettling. She didn't know how to respond, so she didn't. Instead, she mimicked him and leaned back against the seat, her mind still racing, as the SUV sped through Gotham's shadowy streets. She was alive, and for now, that was enough. Vampire rule number 27. The only reason you sparkle is because you spent too much time at children's parties. You bloody degenerate. The rumble of the mechanical steed beneath them echoed through the nearly empty streets of Gotham by night, as the ever-so-faithful, slightly superhuman miracle of man called Reginald Cousins drove the battered SUV out of Red Hook and the industrial storage zone, careful to avoid the patrol cars rushing toward the scene of the dozen or so crimes committed in that warehouse. So much lawbreaking was bound to get at least some detectives off their asses and into the ghetto for some good old-fashioned murder policing, not to mention the dozen uniforms rushing toward the scene. Either way, nothing a Gothamite wanted to deal with. They were soon back home in East End, where the SUV with its damaged front and multiple bullet holes looked perfectly normal, if not a bit too posh for the area. Perks of living 3 floors up from hell. John chuckled, earning himself a strange look from his new pet collaborator. He meant his new collaborator. No need to call HR on him. Bubbles didn't react. He was already used to his antics. Copperhead kept glancing at John, her brow furrowed. The silence between them was thick with unasked questions, but it wasn't long before she gave in. "How the hell did you do it?" she asked, the almost painful curiosity breaking through her thick and rather attractive accent. "You took all these bullets like it was nothing, slaughtered these Hios de Puta, and ignored my poison. No one can just ignore my poison. Only I have the antidote." The fact that he took these bullets for her was not stated but understood by both parties. She owed him big time. Still, the way she was more interested by his ability to shrug off her poison was quite amusing, almost endearing in a messed-up way. John chuckled, flicking the hair from his eyes as the wind whipped past from the open window. Practice, sweetheart. That and a killer diet. Literally. Reginald, who had been sitting stoically in the front seat, struggled to fight off a smile. "See, Reg gets it. It's about keeping things fresh." John smirked, enjoying the inside joke. "Fine." Copperhead sighed, clearly frustrated but unable to deny the results. "What even are you? Technically? A guy who hates paperwork and loves going on walks, very enthusiastic walks," John quipped, and somewhere in the depths of oblivion, someone watching Adventure Time while slaughtering Nazis felt very proud of him. "But also, I guess you could call me a problem solver, and this world is full of big, angry problems who just can't let a man enjoy his life stress-free. Problems like me?" she hissed, shifting into a more casual sitting position, one bandaged foot on the seat, where it will doubtlessly leave a stain. John could almost picture Tarantino getting a nosebleed. "You? Nah, you're not a problem." He shook his head, opening an eye to give her a look that clearly meant, "You don't even qualify as an inconvenience, but I'm not gonna say because I've got manners and shit." She didn't like it very much but was smart enough not to do something stupid and possibly suicidal. Reginald's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror as they approached a discreet garage in the East End. The ride had been smooth, the night passing by in a blur of neon lights and grimy streets, with a noticeable loss in the number of hardcore dope fiends lurking around. Not a huge difference, but it was something. It meant that their efforts were starting to pay off and would soon produce dividends. But now it was time to switch. "We're here, sir," Reginald said, slowing the car to a halt. The garage door creaked open, and an older mechanic with grease-stained hands waved them in. It was part of their escape plan. Switch cars, leave no trail. If there was one thing John would learn from the bat, then it would be his plans, their contingencies, and the contingency to their contingencies. Now planning for a one-ghoul-strong exfiltration team in case things went south wasn't exactly rocket science, but it did the job. They stepped out of their vehicle, the clinking sound of tools and the soft hum of machinery filling the air. The mechanic grunted a hello before motioning toward a sleek, black Lincoln parked on the far side of the garage. "Lincoln's prepped and ready," the mechanic said, tossing Reginald the key to his baby. Copperhead stayed oddly silent in the meantime, not quite knowing what to do with herself, trying not to think about the ramifications of the betrayal, how deep it went, and what it meant for her future. Fleeing was an option, and she knew she could deal with a life on the run, taking hits and trying to avoid the heat until the cartels forget her. The new Copperhead would surely come after her to prove himself and save the cartel the embarrassment of a previous ace killer running about on her own. For a group that relied on fear and reputation, letting her be wasn't on the table. But she could beat him. She knew she could do it. He might be some snake-faced freak, but she had years of experience on him, and she never had to rely on some powers she never earned in the first place. Yet she stayed put, standing around like an obedient puppy and following that monster and his insane butler into the car, half listened to their banter as they got more comfortable. Was it out for fear of the Bruja? Was it to honor some debt for saving her life despite her trying to take his? Was it because she couldn't forget how it felt to be held and protected from harm at the cost of his own flesh and to have someone finally care enough to suffer for her? To have someone put her life, her safety, above their own? Because she wanted more of that? More of those absurd, useless emotions? Those liabilities would only hinder her work, her purpose as a killer for hire, and things she hated with passion and craved so desperately. She didn't know. She didn't want to know. Larissa. She said it, not daring enough to look at the monster who saved her life. He said, and she could almost feel those eyes on her. Once a terrifying red yet somehow turned into a more peaceful, striking blue. My name is Larissa Diaz, she said curtly so that he might not realize what kind of gesture it was. To give away her name, something that she had hidden since her childhood. Since the day she started training to become the finely tuned instrument of murder she was today. A name nobody alive knew was hers. Not in the cartels, not in the city that imprisoned her for years, and not even that damn Batman that beat her so long ago. It almost felt foreign on her tongue, but she didn't regret it. She felt like she needed to do it. I will remember it, he said with such weight that she truly knew, that he realized what she did, understood the implication and accepted it. I will be in your care, was what she wanted to say. You better, was what she ended up saying, gaze stuck to the window, still unwilling to meet his eyes. And John took that personally. When someone snatched her chin and turned her head, her immediate reaction was to slash his throat with a poison-covered metal claw, but her hand was stopped midway and held in a strong vice-like grip. She was about to insult him, curse him out for startling her, and for ruining such a nice moment, though she would never admit to the latter. But she looked at him, her slitted eyes meeting his own, and her anger was blown away. It's very nice to meet you, Larissa Diaz, he said slowly, deliberately, tasting the way her name sounded and finding it adequate. I am John Harker. She did not blush. But this John Harker, was a dangerous man indeed. Those lying, backstabbing cowards had at least one thing right. He really was a monster. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Brideshead, Commissioner Jim Gordon stood amidst yet another scene of urban carnage. The warehouse was littered with bodies. Over 40 men lay dead, their corpses twisted in brutal ways. Blood pooled on the cracked pavement, and the air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and death. He felt like he was back in Vietnam, minus the mosquitoes. 30 more gangsters had been injured, 10 of them in critical condition. Gordon pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on him. This was more than just another gang fight. This was a massacre. No, more murders in one night and one place than most big cities saw in an entire month was more than a mere massacre. That was an understatement if he ever saw one. It's a Gotham-grade massacre. Harvey Bullock stood next to him, his face twisted into a grimace as he surveyed the scene. This is Batman's work, I bet, Bullock grumbled, lighting up a cigarette. Gordon shook his head, his brow furrowed. That's not his way. Batman doesn't kill. You'd think people would know it after so much time. 40 dead, Gordon. All of them from the same gang. All of them fighting a single man. And the survivors? They're all moaning about some freaking monster. Monster this, monster that. Came out of nowhere and bashed my friend's skull. Broke our guns with one hand and beat us with it? Rings any bell? Bullock spat, smoke curling up from his lips. And where's that anti-Batman task force I was supposed to get? Judge Harkness already gave his word. Calm down, Bullocks. You know as much as I do that Batman never kills, the commissioner said calmly, now used to his subordinate's rowdy nature. And unless our good friend the judge steps down from his high chair and becomes the police chief, then that task force can wait. We're spread thin enough as it is. Well, maybe if I had it then all this wouldn't have happened. Bullocks growled under his breath but didn't dare meet his superior's eyes. Gordon ignored Bullock's complaints, scanning the scene again. It was true. Batman had his ways of dealing with criminals, and every once in a while some other vigilante without nearly as much moral fiber would come along and start cutting throats. But this was different. This was systematic, almost surgical. Every kill seemed purposeful, not random or reckless. This wasn't a symbol being sent, it was extermination. A man stabbed with his own shattered pistol, another's rifle shoved down his throat. The risks the killer took to pull it off were nothing short of impressive. "We'll need to gather forensics," Gordon said, his voice steady. "I want to know exactly what happened here, and start questioning survivors properly. Somebody knows something, and they better tell us everything if they don't want to be charged for everything we can find." Bullock snorted. "Good luck getting anything out of these guys. Half of them can barely breathe, let alone talk. Reminds you of somebody?" Still, Gordon was certain that it wasn't Batman behind this. He might be a vigilante, but he has his own rules. He was someone Jim could rely on even when the brass decided that hunting him down was a good idea despite all previous attempts failing. There is something else at play, something wicked. Gordon lit up his pipe, ignoring the nagging voices of his wife and daughter echoing in his head and telling him to put it down if he knew what was good for him. Ignoring the fact that he did not know what was good for him, he joined the police in Gotham after all. That made him a moron amongst morons. He was no stranger to wickedness either, not as someone who spent so much time in this city, saw what it did to people, and experienced all the grimness and gore firsthand. He really should retire.
Vampire Wu-Raute 28. Denn die Totten reiten schnell.
When your life is falling apart, it does so slowly, and then all at once. The night was eerily quiet around DeAndre Etienne's villa, the man who answered to the not-so-sweet name of Hungry. His house was nestled deep in the woods that formed the domain of the wealthy, the houses in the county far from the aisles where the rich and powerful could rest without fear. The villa, a relic of old money that Hungry had purchased when the drug trade started filling his pockets, now felt like a tomb. The long driveway, once lined with well-maintained shrubs, was overgrown. The lavish pool, once a sight for sore eyes full of scantily clad ladies so desperate to catch his eye, ready to obey his every word, was now left empty, dirty, and abandoned, and the mansion's ornate windows, though grand, appeared like the hollow eyes of a skull. It was all rotten, moldy, and waiting for death. Inside, Hungry sat with a half-empty glass of whiskey, his nerves unraveling as the silence around him deepened. He had been running things smoothly. Well, as smoothly as it gets when you are at the top of a criminal conspiracy in Gotham City, but even then things were good, until that monster showed up. One moment, he was running his territory without a hitch. The next, his men were being torn apart. First, a few thugs here and there, ones nobody really cared about, a couple fine stick-ups leaving them bruised and empty-handed. Annoying, but it was expected, the costs of doing business. They said it was Batman, but only a complete idiot would buy that. The Bat wouldn't crush a 14-year-old's hand because he raised a pistol, nor would he just take the drugs and money without the cops appearing to pick up the bodies a few minutes later. No, it wasn't his style. Then, his top earners started vanishing and coming back as giant, penniless, drugless bruises. Stash after stash, soldier after soldier, someone was trying to destroy his small kingdom, and that was something he couldn't ignore. Or so he thought. If I knew, I would have pocketed my money and left this freaking city. If I knew. He lamented, then filled yet another glass to drown his regrets. Nothing he tried could stop that thing, that freaking monster. No amount of men could slow him down. No attempt to hide the drugs was successful. He was losing money, drugs, and soldiers every day, but that was nothing compared to what it did to his reputation. And then they met, if it could even be called that. Even now, more than a month later, his jaw still hurt from the vicious strikes, his ribs still ached and stung, and his ego was reeling and demanding revenge. Little did he know that revenge would only make the monster explore new heights of brutality. It wasn't like this from the start. The monster played his little games, crippling business but keeping the men alive, so Hungry figured it was just one of Gotham's usual freak shows. Someone making a name for themselves. He'd even thought about hiring him for security. Sure, he beat him up and he did want a pound of flesh for that one, but this was Gotham and holding grudges when you could be making money wasn't the way. But after meeting the other bosses, after accepting that deal with the cartel, killing their blunt knife in exchange for a massive discount, something he conveniently forgot to mention to his associates when it was time to pay up, it was too late. Out of nearly 100 men sent to get rid of the snake bitch and the monster, more than 40 ended up dead, 20 were beaten to a pulp, and the rest ran away to who knows where. The smartest decision they could make, really, but it was still a massive loss. The monster had crossed the line. And so had Hungry when he agreed to double-cross that assassin, Copperhead. It was a desperate move, but one that came back to haunt him now, sitting in his villa with dread curling in his gut like a tightening noose. Tomorrow, he would be in a plane heading straight for Bermuda, with a couple millions in his pocket and a few loyal brothers who deserved an escape. But until then, they needed to survive. Hungry glanced nervously at the few men still loyal to him, scattered around the dimly lit room. Each one had been handpicked, thugs, brutes, and killers he had known for years. But even they looked rattled, their hands gripping their guns too tightly, eyes darting to the windows as if expecting the shadows to attack. The tension in the air was suffocating. "Where the hell is he?" one of the men muttered, pacing by the fireplace. His voice cracked, betraying his fear. "Shut up," Hungry snapped, though the edge of panic in his own voice was hard to ignore. He slammed his glass on the table, spilling expensive whiskey across the mahogany. "We've got enough firepower here to drop anyone who shows up. The monster can't kill us all. Yeah, the freak who killed off 40 men will be stopped by a couple gangsters." The words rang hollow even to him. He knew they were sitting ducks, trapped in this gaudy villa, waiting for an enemy they couldn't fight. Worse, there had been no word from the men he'd sent out to patrol the grounds. No one had checked in for hours. They might have betrayed them, stolen some fancy crap, and fled while they could. He hoped they did. The ticking of an old grandfather clock was the only sound breaking the silence now. Tick, tick, tick. Hungry's nerves were frayed, the rhythmic sound gnawing at him. Every tick seemed like a countdown to his death. He felt like shooting it, but his men were so afraid they might kill him as a reflex. "Where the hell is Tony?" one of the guards growled, nervously glancing at the hallway. Tony had been sent to check on the perimeter hours ago. Hungry opened his mouth to respond when the door burst open. Tony stumbled in, pale as a sheet, blood running down his face from a gash across his temple. He was breathing heavily, his eyes bloodshot and wide with terror. "Boss!" he gasped, but his words were cut off by a loud, sickening snap. Tony's body jerked violently, his head twisted at an unnatural angle, and he crumpled to the floor like a rag doll. Behind him, the woman in the skin-tight suit, Copperhead, stepped through the doorway, her green eyes glinting with something predatory. Hungry felt his stomach drop. "So, this is what you call loyalty?" she asked, her voice smooth and mocking. "Sending me to die after hiring me for a job. I've had worse bosses, but not many." The men around Hungry raised their guns, but before anyone could fire, Copperhead moved. She was faster than any human should be, her body twisting and contorting in a way that defied logic. She darted forward, a blur of motion, and in a heartbeat, she was among them, metal claws flashing. Hungry watched in horror as his men fell one by one. Copperhead didn't kill cleanly. She slashed tendons, crushed windpipes, and left men gurgling for air as they drowned in their own blood. It was brutal, efficient, and terrifying. Compared to this, being killed by some thug sounds like a good time. Shots were fired, bodies dropped, but she was still slaughtering them. In less than a minute, Hungry was the only one left standing. He stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest, eyes darting to the heavy gun on the table. But before he could even think about reaching for it, Copperhead was in front of him. Her hand shot out, grabbing him by the throat, the metal piercing his skin and mixing his blood with her poison. "I'm dead," Hungry gasped, clawing at her hand, but her grip was like iron. His vision blurred, spots dancing in front of his eyes as his body started giving in, his intoxicated brain showing him visions of times long gone. His mother is asking him why he dropped out of school after all the sacrifices she made. His father chased him out of the house when he found a package under his roof, in his own basement. The love of his life rejected him to marry some brown-skinned accountant named Jerry. "You made a mistake," Copperhead whispered, her lips curling into a sadistic smile. "You thought you could use me, but now you get to die for it." Hungry's world began to darken, his final thoughts not of regret or repentance but of hatred. Hatred for the idiot who had suggested double-crossing her, the moron who came up with this mess of a plan. He wished for nothing more than for that fool to suffer a worse death than the one awaiting him. With one last convulsion, Hungry's body went limp in Copperhead's grasp, his eyes glazing over as life left him. Copperhead dropped him unceremoniously on the floor, wiping her hands with his overpriced silk tie. She stood over his body for a moment, her heart still racing from the thrill of the kill. Then, with a quiet exhale, she turned and left the villa, leaving nothing but corpses in her wake. The job was done. It was time to come back home. When Copperhead returned to John's house, the sun was beginning to rise on the horizon. The tension in her shoulders eased as she stepped inside, her senses immediately attuned to the dim lighting and the cool air. She wasn't sure what she expected when she returned, but the sight of John sitting in his high-backed chair, a chalice in hand, didn't surprise her. Standing vigil beside him was his servant, Reginald, though John insisted on calling him Bubbles because there is nothing more intimidating than a scary bastard called Bubbles. She knew better than to question that madman by now. He looked up as she entered, looking a bit tired, yet with a small smile playing on his lips. "You're back," he said softly, his voice smooth as silk. "And I take it Hungry won't be bothering us no more?" Copperhead nodded, the exhaustion of the night catching up with her. "It's done. He's dead. They all are." "Good. You've proven yourself tonight." John's eyes gleamed in what she hoped was approval, his smile widening as he rose from his chair. She stepped closer, her gaze flicking to the chalice in his hand. "So, what now?" John tilted his head, studying her for a moment. "Now, it's time to make our arrangement official." Her brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't back down. She had known this moment was coming. Harker had promised her power and safety, a fraction of the sorcery that made him what he is. She had seen what that man, Reginald, could do. Strength and endurance beyond an untrained man. All because he gave his loyalty to John Harker, he said. Larissa wanted this power. John extended the chalice toward her, the dark liquid inside swirling hypnotically. "Drink," he said, his voice commanding but not harsh. "Drink, and you'll be more than you've ever been. No more running, no more hiding. You'll have strength, speed, and power beyond anything you've known. Safe from the ravages of times, as long as the bond is maintained." She frankly had no idea what he was talking about. "Will it make me stronger?" she asked bluntly. "Yes," he answered, still trying to salvage the solemn mood. Copperhead hesitated for only a second before taking the chalice. She raised it to her lips, the liquid thick and cold as it slid down her throat. As she drank, a burning sensation spread through her chest, making her gasp. She dropped the chalice, clutching at her chest as the fire spread through her veins, igniting every cell in her body with newfound strength. John watched, his red eyes glowing with satisfaction. His fangs glinted in the low light, and Copperhead could feel his power wrapping around her like a cloak. When the burning finally subsided, Copperhead straightened, her breathing ragged but steady. She felt different. Stronger, faster, sharper. Everything about her felt heightened, as if the world had suddenly come into focus. John stepped closer, his gaze locked on hers. "Welcome to your new life," he said softly, his voice laced with power. "We must renew the bond for 3 nights, and then you will truly become my faithful ghoul." She met his gaze, feeling the bond between them like a pull at her very core. It wasn't the same as the contracts she had taken in the past. This was something deeper, something more binding, and she found herself craving it, wanting to serve him, to prove herself to him. It was unnatural. The way the flimsy, emotional loyalty she felt grew stronger after a single night, but she couldn't find it in her to regret it. He kept his word, after all. "I won't let you down," she promised, her voice steady and certain. She now knew what to do. "I know you won't. Now come. We have work to do." John's smile widened, his fangs flashing in the dim light. Unfortunately for him and his plans, Larissa had other plans.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going. Plus, it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.